Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. And I promise you today it's going to work and we're going to get rolling the entire time. I apologize for what happened last night, but I did find out what happened, and it was not something on my end. It was something with StreamYard, so it was something that was out of my control. But we are back today, and we are going to talk about the state of Notre Dame recruiting. And what we're going to do today is we're going to do a few things. We're going to go position by position. And we're going to talk about, obviously, where things are right now, who's in the class, what I think about that, the players that are in the class, go over what is needed for Notre Dame to have a gap-closing class, right? Or in this instances where Notre Dame has already closed the gap, where they are to maintain that. We'll talk about the latest with each recruit, the latest intel that I have with each recruit, where things stand. And then we'll go, like I said, position by position. And then at the end, we'll dive into questions. This will be in podcast form. So if there's something that you do want addressed or you do want asked before we get to the Q&A session, please feel free to put it in the super chat. I'll see it. I'll grab it, and we'll dive into it. So to begin, let's talk about the quarterback position. And where I am with the quarterback position is, I've stated my opinion of how the quarterback recruiting was dealt with in 2022 and just the way that they went about it. But I think there's a couple things that need to be looked at from sort of a let's look at both sides type of thing. Did Notre Dame get a quarterback that was a needle mover, a gap closer? No, they did not. Did Notre Dame get a quarterback that's got some abilities, got some tools, that can be a Jack Cohn type of quarterback in college? Yeah, I think they did. Absolutely. So that's a positive. And when I look at it, they got a kid that's going to recruit well, a kid that's going to be this is where he wanted to be, right? I mean, there was no doubt from the moment he got the Notre Dame offer that Steve Angeli wanted to be at Notre Dame. So he's the kind of kid that you look at and say, if you get like big time player back to back to back, which rarely happens, it's going to be hard to keep all those guys. And then when somebody leaves because they got beat out, whether it's an older guy got beat out by a younger guy or vice versa, then now all of a sudden you're in some depth issues. And whereas it's good to bring in guys like Steve Angeli from time to time because they are going to be great program guys. And if they reach their full potential, they are guys that you can win with if you surround them with enough talent. And we've seen that before. And that's kind of where I, kind of a Drew Pine, although there's things Drew Pine does better than in my opinion, Steve Angeli, but that's where Jack Cohn is. Jack Cohn is not someone that I would put on the same level as like Tyler Buchner from a talent standpoint, for example, but he is someone that I look at and say, this is a guy that I think you can go win with if everything else around him is where it needs to be. And so I'm okay. I'm good with the quarterback in this class. And the other part of it too is the 2023 quarterback class is so much better than the 2022 quarterback class. And that to me is the class where you've now got sort of two classes that are sort of side by side that you look at and say, okay, you've now got some distance between Tyler Buchner and that next big time quarterback. And I think that to me is where the focus should be for Notre Dame when it comes to, really building up that type of high level class. And so that's where I'm at when it comes to the quarterback position in this class. So I'm good with it. Now the key is let's get to the next level. So now we're going to bring up the what we had last night, and we're going to dive into each position. We're going to go position by position, and we're going to talk about where things stand with Notre Dame recruiting at running back. And if we do have any issues that come up, please just let me know, and hopefully this will work. But I want to start off at running back. Okay, and running back to me is a unique situation because 2 years ago, going into the 2019 season, running back was arguably the biggest concern on the football team. There were some, let's say, recruiting woes that had happened in the previous position coach, Coach Denson, and it just left Notre Dame in a bad spot when it came to the depth of talent and the overall impact of this class. So, let me just say real quick, Coach Quinn did not cut off my Wi-Fi yesterday, but that's very, very well played. But back to the running back situation. I think that what they did, obviously getting Chris Tyree in 2020 was huge. I love the two-man group last year. Jadarian Price is a great place to start. And I think that Lance Taylor has done a lot of work in a short period of time, and it's not all him. It's been a team effort with some of these kids. Obviously, Chip Long had a huge role in Chris Tyree coming here. Terry Joseph had a huge role in Logan Diggs coming here. But the point is that with Lance Taylor as the running backs coach and the work he has also played in this, the running back depth chart is in good shape. And when I talk about the objective of the running back group, that's not necessarily a need. That's more of a want. Notre Dame wants a second running back. And so after they got Jadarian Price, and again, they took Jadarian Price even when at the time you could make the case that they were at least the leader or co-leader for all three of the running backs, sort of the big three, which at the time consisted of Dallin Hayden, Gavin Sawchuk, and of course, Nicholas Singleton. Hayden has since committed to Ohio State. Sawchuk has committed to Oklahoma, but they took Jadarian Price at a time when you could have argued that they could have got two of those three players. And of course, they took Jadarian Price, which I think was a good take because I really like Jadarian Price. I like his upside. I like his ability in the pass game. I like the different things that he brings to the table in that part. I think he's a little bigger than I thought he was going to be. He's a slasher. He's a one cut and go guy. He can run between the tackles. He can get outside. He can catch the ball. I think he brings some versatility in the pass game. You haven't seen him do it a ton, but the things that I have seen from him in the pass game, I like, especially being able to line up outside and run routes, which is a good thing. So now you're at the point now where you want to add a second running back. And the reason I think that you are looking at a player like Nicholas Singleton is because as good as the other running backs are, Nicholas Singleton's going to be the best running back, the best all-around running back you've signed in a while. Now, the highest graded running back I've had is Chris Tyree. But Chris Tyree is a different kind of back than Nicholas Singleton. When I'm talking about an all-around back, I'm talking about a guy that can do from a running standpoint, just a pure running standpoint. You know, the size to be able to hammer between the tackles, to be a short yardage back, to be a guy that can make plays in the goal line, the agility, athleticism to be able to be a guy that can make cuts and make plays, a guy that brings enough speed to be a home run threat. Nicholas Singleton certainly does that. He was the number 2 back on my board behind Dallin Hayden, but he was the only back that I evaluated in this cycle that Notre Dame was looking at that had a 5-star upside grade. And the talent is there. And my only concern, and the reason he didn't grade out as high, and a reason why I created the systems that I have, is because Nicholas Singleton comes from a system where he is mostly an outside zone and he's an option runner. And so there's a lot of things that I think he'll be able to do that I just haven't seen him do, which is where the upside grade comes from. But the current grade is I can't grade him positively for something I haven't seen him do, or at least seen him do very often. For example, I believe based on his stats that Nicholas Singleton has like 15 or 16 career catches in high school. So obviously his pass game grade, and he doesn't pass block a whole lot either. They just don't throw a lot. So his pass game grade can't be high because I haven't seen him do it. And the stuff he's done has been just little check down. So do I think he can be a good pass catcher? Yes. But can I grade him as such right now? No, I can't. And so that's why we have the 2 grades. But from a pure talent standpoint, there is a lot to like about Nicholas Singleton, and that's why Notre Dame is pushing for him. And he, to me, is a key to really getting a big time gap closing type of haul. Jadarian Price moves the needle forward a little bit based on where you were. Nicholas Singleton hurdles it. I mean, it's a big jump forward, and you put him in a backfield with Jadarian Price, with Audric Estime, with Logan Diggs, and potentially for a year or two with Chris Tyree. And there are not many teams in the country that you're going to be able to look at and say, gee, I bet you that Notre Dame would love to have their backfield. You're going to be able to count that on one hand. That's how good recruiting has been, but also how Nicholas Singleton really, really closes that gap. Now, where things stand right now, essentially since he visited Notre Dame on the weekend of the 18th, he has visited Texas A&M and Alabama. I do not expect either of those schools to be players for Nicholas Singleton. The latest intel that I have is the same as when he left Notre Dame, which is Nicholas likes Notre Dame a lot. I feel like that's the direction this is trending. Penn State and some around him, there's going to be a lot of pressure on him to stay in state, And having lived in Pennsylvania for a few years during my coaching career, that's a state that's very pro-Penn State, especially where he lives in the eastern part of the state. Not so much in Pittsburgh area, but he's from Reading, so he's from the eastern part of the state. A lot of pressure on him to stay in state. Notre Dame obviously has to work through that, but it's a Notre Dame-Penn State battle. I feel really good about where Notre Dame stands right now. I think that Nicholas Singleton will probably make a decision sooner rather than later, meaning in the next month. He's going to make a decision. He's always wanted to make a decision before his senior year starts. And barring a shift of course, I really like where Notre Dame is at. So when you look at the backfield, if you can get Nicholas Singleton in this class, there is no doubt about it that Notre Dame has moved the needle when it comes to that position. So that is certainly a plus. Now, let's talk about wide receiver recruiting. And we're not going to spend a whole lot of time right now focusing on the topic that we have debated a lot here at Irish Breakdown, because again, I don't want to get in the habit of just having the same arguments and the same content over and over again, even though I believe the things that I'm going to say. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to look at it from the Notre Dame point of view, offer a brief critique of it, or at least a concern of it, and then talk about how we'd like to see it play out. And then, of course, how what could happen in the future could ultimately result in it making a little bit more sense for what they're doing right now in this class. So number one, obviously coming into the cycle, 2 to 3 was the number. You've had 4 players leave the roster since the end of the season. One of them was expected. We all expected Micah Jones to leave. He has graduated. He was not in Notre Dame's plans for 2021. So he's now at Illinois State. Since then, however, Kendall Abdur-Rahman, Jordan Johnson, and Jay Brunel have all left the roster. They were all players that had at least 4 years of eligibility remaining. And so when you talk about the fact that you lost 3 young players, including guys that I think can play, and especially Kendall Abdur-Rahman and Jordan Johnson, guys that can play. And then with Kendall Abdur-Rahman, he brings a skill set that you don't have a lot of in your younger classes. And that is as an after the catch, ball in your hands type of athlete. Now, when that happened, that opened up opportunities for Notre Dame to go out and get another player in this class. So now the number's up to 3 to 4. I think that's where Notre Dame is. They have a current commit in a Mauryan Walker. I've done some digging on this. It sounds like, he's obviously been offered by Alabama recently as a defensive back. He was offered by LSU as a wide receiver. So his offer list is still growing. The sources I talked to are all very confident that he's going to remain in the class with Notre Dame. We talked a little bit about this last week, but Mauryan is not your stereotypical Southeastern kid in that there's this assumption that a kid from this state is going to go to that school if he gets in-state offer. Mauryan, from everything that I've been told, comes from a family that puts a lot of value on the education aspect of things. A family that understands that there's a lot more to being a college athlete as far as preparing yourself for your future than just playing football. He has family that has played Division I football, obviously, and he's a young man that, from everything I'm told, looks at Notre Dame, and the family looks at Notre Dame as number one, a great football option, because I don't think anyone would pick Notre Dame that cares about being great if it wasn't a great football option. But they are really attracted to the idea of what Notre Dame can do academically from a branding standpoint, which is sort of one of the new pitches for Notre Dame. But before that, he committed before the branding thing really took off. So I feel good about where Mauryan Walker is right now as far as his commitment to Notre Dame, the solid nature of it. Now, obviously, Notre Dame is much higher on Mauryan Walker than I am. I talked to somebody about this yesterday, very high on him. They want to keep him receiver. They have had conversations about if he wanted to play defense, would they be open to that? Yes, but they want him on offense. Tommy Rees really wants a Mauryan Walker. They like it. They love his potential there. Obviously, I don't see that because I don't have enough film to feel good about this. I've said before, but you can believe he's going to be one of the first guys I'm going to have my eye on when we get to fall film. And I'm hoping that when we get to fall film, that my grade of him is going to go way up. And based on conversations I've had with people that I like, I trust and respect their knowledge, they think that his grade is going to go up in my eyes. They think that he is going to be someone that I view as a lot better once I get better film of him. And hopefully that proves to be the case. So what's next for Notre Dame? When you look at what Notre Dame needs to do to put together sort of a gap closing class, I think it's sort of a no-brainer. And that is, they need Tobias Merriweather and CJ Williams in the class. They need both of them in the class. Those, to me, are 2 top 100, legit top 100 players. When I look at Tobias Merriweather, his current grade, is just a few points away from being a 4.5-star grade, which means top 50 player. He and CJ Williams are both on my grade, bona fide top 100 players. CJ Williams obviously ranks as the number 29 player in the country by Rivals. He's number 46 by 247 Sports. I have him more in the 70 to 90 range is sort of more of where I have him. But I like them both. I think they do a lot of similar things, but the reason I like both of them and have wanted both of them in the class is I think they do complement each other relatively well. They have some Claypool Boykin to them a little bit. And what I mean by that is my overall issue with the receiving core is that there's too many guys that are similar. And that's been an issue. And that's somewhat true of Merriweather and Williams. However, as we saw in 2018, that can work well. At least 1-2 can work well. My issue is more the third guy and the complementary pieces to that. But the 1-2 of Claypool, because Claypool could stretch the field a little bit more. He was a guy that could do some things after the catch. He brought a little bit of more versatility, whereas Miles Boykin was more of a true boundary player. I think these two have a little bit of that complementary nature to it. But I would actually add that this duo of CJ Williams and Tobias Merriweather would be even more versatile than the Boykin-Claypool deal, because I think they're both more versatile than Miles Boykin was. And when you look at CJ Williams, CJ is a volume pass catcher. I've talked about this before. He's a Juju Smith type of guy. He's gonna, he can get to 150, 120 yards in a game, but he's going to do it on 7 to 9, 10 catches. Whereas a guy like Xavier Bradshaw or a current roster Braden Lindsey can get to that number on 3 or 4 catches. And that's fine. Good route runner, great ball skills, strong, smart football player with, I think, another gear to be had from a speed standpoint, but he's never going to be a burner. But that's not what you're recruiting him to do. Tobias Merriweather, on the other hand, is taller. He's 6'4". They've both got great one-on-one ball skills. Tobias brings a little bit more wiggle to the table. He's got some of that Chase Claypool after the catch ability, where he's not like a Jaden Waddle or Jaylen Waddle. He's not a Devontae Smith. He's not that kind of after the catch guy, but he can be a guy like Chase Claypool, where if he gets a crease, he can do some damage with it. He's a really good route runner. I believe, honestly, I think I've graded out Tobias Merriweather as one of my 5 to 7 best favorite receivers in the entire class. Not for Notre Dame, for anybody. I think he's got that kind of talent, and he's a pretty smart football player. He understands how to run routes and things like that. His development, his growth is going to come from just physically growing. But I think he's a kid. I think they're both kids that can play early on. So then if you are able to get them, and we'll get into where things stand after that, then what do you do next, right? To me, that the pecking order is how I have it listed, in my opinion. So Nicholas Anderson, Alec Eyamanor, and then Xavier Turner Bradshaw. That, to me, is the pecking order for Notre Dame. They would like to get Nicholas Anderson in the class next. He is a little different than the other two players from a skill set standpoint. What he does is similar to what they do. He brings nothing new to the table that those two guys don't already bring. But his strengths are a little bit different. He's a fluid, smooth route runner kind of guy. He's not as explosive as Tobias. He's not as strong and physical as CJ Williams. He's just a really smooth, fluid pass catcher. He knows how to get open. He's one of the better route runners on the Notre Dame board. He's a good football player. He's just not a dynamic football player. He's not a guy that moves the needle. But if you get Nicholas Anderson and he's your 3rd or 4th receiver, depending on how Mauryan Walker projects as a senior, there's a lot of teams that would love to have Nicholas Anderson as their 3rd or 4th receiver. I know there's Power 5 teams that want Nicholas Anderson as their number 1, number 2 receiver. But for Notre Dame to kind of close the gap and move the needle and all those different things that we talk about on Alabama, on Ohio State, on Clemson, you need him to be your 3rd or 4th best receiver. I think Eyamanor is a kid that if they miss out on one of the first 2 kids that they would make a push for. I don't think Notre Dame can get to 5 receivers in this class. And even if they could, I don't think it'd be wise, because that's a lot of receivers in one class and you're going to end up losing guys. And that, to me, doesn't help anything. So I would stick at 4. Unless you see a scenario in which Mauryan Walker is going to move to safety, which right now that's not in the cards. My understanding is he wants to play offense, and Notre Dame wants him to play offense. So then it's about, okay, where do you stand with Merriweather and Williams? If you don't get one of those 2 guys, then I think they move on to Eyamanor and Xavier Turner Bradshaw. That's how I see that playing out. Obviously, you've got to get the first 2 guys. The success of this recruiting class is going to come down to their ability to close on Merriweather and Williams. Now, here's where things stand with both of them. I believe coming out of the visits, we're sitting here late June, heading into July. I believe Notre Dame leads for both of them. All of my intel tells me Notre Dame is the clear leader for both of them. Here's the battle for Notre Dame. The battle for Notre Dame right now is not necessarily against a particular school for either player. The battle for Notre Dame right now is whether or not you can convince them to join the class now. I believe that if both of them made summer decisions, I believe they would pick Notre Dame. My intel tells me they would pick Notre Dame. The concern, however, is that if they decide to take their recruitments into the fall, and if they want to make game visits, then that's going to make it a little bit trickier. Now, Notre Dame's in a good position because they are the leader, but there are programs not involved with both of them that could then get involved, especially with Tobias Merriweather. CJ Williams already has Texas and Alabama and Ohio State after him, but there are other programs that could continue to make a push, and it would leave the window open for those programs like Texas, like Ohio State, like Alabama to move up the ladder with Notre Dame or to beat out Notre Dame. Whereas if CJ Williams commits, he strikes me as the kind of kid that when he commits, it's going to be done. He's not going anywhere. And Tobias Merriweather strikes me as the same kind of young man. That's why it's so important to get them in the class. I'm even more concerned about Tobias Merriweather because there are programs not involved with him that I could see getting involved with him if he goes out and has the kind of senior year I think he's capable of. And so that would be a little bit tricky. So really you talk about the state of wide receiver recruiting, it comes down to that. These next 2 to 3 weeks to a month at receiver recruiting are going to define this class, in my opinion. If Notre Dame does not get them in the fold this summer, I don't see this staff having the conviction in itself to stand firm and go the distance. I think they would maybe go the distance with one, but I think you'd see them kind of go down to the next guys on the list and take somebody, which then would make it harder, if not impossible, for you to still get both of those two players. That's the big fear that I have with this group. Now, if you get into that situation and that means you end up taking Xavier Turner Bradshaw, that's a win for me personally, but I don't think that's how Notre Dame would see it. And I still would say, depending on who your other guy is, do you get Williams or Merriweather is going to also determine that. But let's say you just get one of them, and you get it's either Merriweather, CJ Williams. Just get one of them with Anderson, with Walker, with Turner Bradshaw. That's a pretty good receiver core. I think there's a little bit more diversity in that group. But now you don't have necessarily the high-level talent of the bigger players. So then you can say, okay, then you can put it into next year. You get another bigger guy next year, maybe a Carnell Tate, somebody like that. If you decide not to take Turner Bradshaw because you say, hey, look, we like the guys that we have next year. We like Jaylen Brown. We like some of the other players that are on the board for next year, Nathaniel Joseph. So we like them more than Xavier Bradshaw. So we're gonna focus on maybe some bigger, more polished guys now that can play early, and then focus on building up your more athletic guys next year. If that's the route that they go, I'm cool with that actually, and that may surprise some people if it means you got Williams and Merriweather. If that's what that means, then I'm good with it. If it means you only get one of them plus Anderson and Ao Manor, then I have a problem with that. That would be problematic. Whereas at least Williams and Merriweather give you those really high ceilings that make you feel good about making that kind of decision. So that's where receiver recruiting is. We are going to know, I would say, within a month. If we're sitting here a month from now and one or both of those top two receivers, Merriweather and Williams, have not committed yet, then we're going to be I'm going to be a little bit more concerned with where things stand at that position. Tight end is a position, too, where Notre Dame is full. They're done at tight end. It was a bit of a roller coaster ride, but I think at the end of the day, Notre Dame is not in gap closing mode at tight end. Notre Dame is in sustaining the gap, right? Because they are the trendsetter. They are the program that everyone aspires to be at tight end. And I believe that the 1-2 punch that Notre Dame got is outstanding. I think it's an excellent group. I think Eli Raridan and Holden Stace complement each other very well. I think they can do similar things, but they can also do very different things. You can play them together a lot. They're also not players that necessarily have to play right away. They both have some projectability, which, based on the current roster, is not a bad thing because there is a lot of talent on the current roster. You can take your time with them. You don't have to play them. And if they do play early, it's because they're just so good that they have to play. So that certainly is a big strength in this class. You have a chance to really put together a great offensive class of skill players when you look at you've got your quarterback, you've already got a really good running back, you've got a very high ceiling receiver that the staff likes, you've got two excellent tight ends. Now it comes down to Singleton, Merriweather, and Williams. If you can hit a home run and get all three of those guys, you're talking about an offensive class that's going to be very, very good from a recruiting ranking standpoint and from a practical standpoint. We can have our debates about whether or not it's the ideal group and should they have a more shifty guy, a guy that brings a different skill set. And we can have that argument, but it's an argument from strength. And I think that's where I look at it. If you get Merriweather and Williams, that's the key to me. Whether it's Anderson or Manor as your third guy or maybe fourth guy, we can have that debate. But Merriweather, Williams, and Singleton to me are the key to this offensive staff or this offensive group from a skill standpoint as a whole, being a gap closing group. Running back, I think they are going to. I feel good about where they're at with Singleton. I feel they're going to have a gap closing class there. We talked about tight end. Now it comes down to receiver, and of course, the non-skill positions are the offensive line. This, to me, is the biggest question mark that we have. So at receiver, I feel like Notre Dame is in a great position with Tobias Merriweather and C.J. Williams. It's just about, can you close? And you may lose ground if they don't close. But right now, I feel like Notre Dame is the leader for Singleton, Merriweather, and Williams, which is a great place to be. I believe they're the leader for Nicholas Anderson. So they're in a great place there. Offensive line is a little bit of a different animal. So let's first talk about the three kids that are on board. Number one, you've got Joey Tanona, who is, to me, a very good football player, top 150 to top 200 caliber kid. Can play guard, can play center, could play tackle. He's got some versatility, although ideally you like him inside. Very good start to the online class. You have Ashton Craig as your other most recent pickup. He's also from Indiana, another guy that I think can play center, guard, and tackle. High ceiling guy. I like Ashton Craig. He's not your typical 3-star. I believe he would not be a 3-star if this was not a weird COVID year where guys couldn't visit and you couldn't size them up and all those type of things. That's a good pickup. The key to the current commitment group, and ultimately the thing that could save this entire offensive line class, is Tai Chan. When Notre Dame got Tai Chan, he was kind of a tall, skinny defensive lineman looking guy. Did any of you all see the pictures of Tai Chan from his visit this past weekend to Notre Dame? He looks like a completely different kid. He doesn't even look like the same kid we saw. And he was a sophomore at the time. He's over 300 pounds now. He's filled out tremendously well. The question that we have now is that athleticism that he showed as a young player going to still be there? If Tai Chan moves like he did in 2019, in 2021 with the extra strength, then you're going to go from a guy that's sort of like a top 250 kind of guy, which is where he's ranked now, to a guy that's going to shoot up the rankings, like way up the rankings. So that's sort of a bit of an asterisk for me when it comes to the current commits, because you look at it and say, if he has the jump that I hope he has, then it changes some things with how the current group is already perceived. Then it's about, with what you add next, is going to determine whether this is a really good offensive line class or the kind of elite offensive line class you need. And I think Notre Dame needs that. And look, in recent years, Notre Dame has landed some very good offensive linemen. Love Tosh Baker and Michael Carmody from the 2020 group. Really, really love Blake Fisher and Rocco Spindler. Like Joe Alt's upside. The problem is you completely struck out on the offensive line in 2020 after those two. You look at your 2019 class, there's only 3 of them left. One is already transferred. John Holmes has already transferred. And even though they're going into their junior year, there's a chance none of those 3 are going to be starting this year. They have not been developed all that well, or they have not developed themselves, whatever the argument you want to use. I'm not trying to have that argument right now, but the fact is they're not developed as anyone would hope that they're developed. And then last year's class, you had Caleb Johnson, who's a solid player, but not a typical Notre Dame talent. You have Patrick Coogan, also a depth guy. And then you have Joe Alt with the 2 studs. So there's been some really good players join the group, but they needed numbers and they needed impact numbers in this class. And whether or not they're going to get that is going to be determined by how this class finishes. And it's been a disappointing couple months for offensive line recruiting. When you look at the remaining targets, you have Billy Shrouth, who to me is a top 100 player. And I think Billy Shrouth is one of the better offensive linemen in the country. I really do, especially a guy who's more of an interior first type of player. One of the things I love about Billy Shrouth is the fact that I think even though he is a guard in high school, I could see Billy Shrouth being a guy that could end up being a tackle in college. I think he's got the athleticism for it. I think he's got the length for it. I think he's got the demeanor for it. Maybe they don't want to play him there, and that's fine. But I just think that he's got that kind of skill where he could get in here and you put him at guard and you're like, man, this guy moves a little better than we thought. Or he's a kid that you say, let's try him at tackle first and move him inside. I'm a big proponent of that, by the way, in case you didn't know that. I'm a big fan of giving everyone except, Zeke Correll. There's the occasional kid that, that guy's an inside guy. But I'd start all those guys, give them a chance to start off a tackle. I think it's a lot easier to go from outside in than it is to start from the inside and move back out. That's just my personal opinion. So I love Billy Shrouth. I love what he brings to the table. I think Zach Rice is an outstanding player. He's a top 100 guy. I don't view Zach Rice as the prospect that others do. I think he's very good. I think he's a 70 to 100 caliber ranked guy, closer to 70. I think you could argue maybe a little higher than that, in my opinion. But he's not the 5-star fella that I think people make him out to be. At least I don't see that. I could be wrong. And if he picks Notre Dame, I hope I am wrong. Actually, I hope I'm wrong either way, because he's a Virginia kid and he seems like a really good kid, and I'd like to see him be successful. And again, when I say overrated, I mean overrated in that I don't think he's a top 10 national player. I don't think he's I think he's still a really, really good prospect. And to me, those two are the key for this Notre Dame offensive line class to really be what it's supposed to be when you're at Notre Dame and your O-line U. The two big things that have to happen between now and signing day is, number one, Tai Chan needs to see a jump. He needs to make the improvement I think he's capable of making, or maybe maybe it's not that. Maybe it's more that I hope he's capable of making. And then they need to get one of Shrouth and Rice. Jake Taylor's not going to be an option for Notre Dame. You need one of those two guys. Have to get one of those two guys. If you get one of those two guys and Tai Chan makes a jump, this is an elite offensive line class. If you get one of those two guys and Tai Chan doesn't make a jump, it's still a top 5 offensive line class, in my opinion. That's how good that group can be, even if Tai Chan doesn't make the jump. Because Tai Chan's still a good football player, still a good prospect. He could end up becoming a top 100 caliber prospect, as you'll see when I wrote about him. Even though I gave Tai Chan a 3.5-star grade off his sophomore film, at the time I gave him a 4.5-star upside grade. And I mentioned in the past, I believe, if I haven't, I'm mentioning it now, that I believe he could end up, if he can make some of the jumps where we know he can get bigger, but can he get bigger and maintain his athleticism? Then his upside grade is going to go up to a 5-star grade. He has that kind of length and talent, but I just got to see him do it a little bit. But that's the key. Emil Wagner is an interesting case because Emil's a good football player. He'd be a good pickup. He's a tackle. I have the same concerns about him that Ohio State does, and that is, does he have the body to add the weight you need to really thrive on the edge? That's the reason Ohio State, even though they've offered him, is not pushing for him, according to my Ohio State sources, that he's not necessarily a take right now for them. He's a guy that they've got some other guys ranked higher than him because of the frame. And a couple of those guys have questionable frames too, but they have him ahead of Emil Wagner. So that to me tells you something. And yes, I know he's ranked high by 247 and Rivals has him ranked relatively high, but he's a low floor, higher ceiling guy. And that's a concern for me. So if you get him as your number 4 guy, that's still a good offensive line class, but it's more concerning because you have some lower floor guys with high ceilings. And when you have lower floor guys with high ceilings, you increase your chances that some of those guys don't pan out. And that's where you're at. Now, as far as recruiting, I think Notre Dame is in a good place with Emil Wagner. They've got to close. If Ohio State decides in the next couple weeks that they want him, I think they'll get him. If they don't, then I could see Notre Dame, Maryland, Kentucky sort of being in a battle for him. Carson Hinsman, I think that ship has sailed with Notre Dame. I think even though Notre Dame came into this month of June at worst as his co-leader and is basically all but a lock for Billy Shrouth, obviously that's after the visits, it's in a different place. Wisconsin is basically out. They've out-recruited Notre Dame in for those players. Now, as far as looking at the top 2 guys, when I spoke to people late last week, there was not as much optimism with Billy Shrouth, but there was no intel. There was no okay, he said he's going somewhere else. It was just it doesn't look good. When I reached out to a source yesterday, it was more optimistic. Now, again, still a battle, still a long way to go, but it was more optimistic. And a lot of it was because of Brian Kelly and Tommy Reese have gotten very involved in his recruitment. They are very much pushing for him and trying to get him back in the fold. And Wisconsin has done a great job of using the in-state angle. And there's a lot of pressure on these kids in Wisconsin to stay in-state. Notre Dame is trying to overcome that with Brian Kelly and Tommy Reese. So I'm more optimistic today that they will have a shot to get Billy Shrouth back in the fold than I was 4 or 5 days ago, which is a positive. With Zach Rice, I'm also in a better place now than I was before. I still think Notre Dame has a long way to go with him. He's not in a commit mode anytime soon. He's going to be a down-the-road guy. I think that's good for Notre Dame. That's one of those recruitments that the longer it plays out and the more you can build that relationship, build that bond, maybe get him back on campus for a game, I think the better it's going to be for Notre Dame. It's still, I still don't think they're in his top 2 necessarily, but at the beginning of this cycle, going into the visits, they were, to me, 5 of 5. Now I think at worst they're 3 of 5 at this point in time. And that's a good place to be. That's you had your chance, you had a puncher's chance, and you knocked it out. I mean, you knocked it out basically. And so now they're in the battle. They've still got work to do. They still have teams they have to overcome, but you're in the battle at least. But I still would say it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to get him. All I'm saying is they're in the game now, whereas when you coming into the June visits, I didn't think they were really in the game. And so that's where they're at. They've got to hit on one of those 2 players. If they get to 5 and they want to take Wagner as your 5th and you get one of those top 2 guys, or you're able to make a comeback with Hinsman, like any combination of Shrouth, Rice, or Hinsman with Wagner would make this an excellent class. I mean, that's ultimately where it's got to be an elite class. If they're just going to do, and really, honestly, if they get Shrouth or Rice, it's, to me, a borderline elite class. And if Tai Chan makes the jump he's capable of, then it will be an elite class. And so that's where I'm at with offensive recruiting and offensive line recruiting. So let's talk about the other side of the ball. Let's talk defensive line. And it is amazing how far Notre Dame has come recruiting the defensive line in the last three years with Mike Elston. And we need to talk about that more. And Marcus Freeman deserves a lot of credit for what he's done. I mean, we've talked about it a lot. We've documented it. He's done a phenomenal job recruiting at Notre Dame. But he's not doing it by himself. And I think he'd be the first one to tell you that. And the job that Mike Elston has done on defensive line recruiting is outstanding. Now it's about, can you take that next step? And I think right now that next step is doable. So let's first talk about the current class. Number 1, you needed 4 to 5 defensive linemen. I can live with 4, especially with the current makeup. And the reason I say that is I think Gabera and Agu are pure ends. I think Donovan Heinisch is a pure interior guy. Then you have Tyson Ford, who's 6'6", 260, that in a defense that can rotate between 3 and 4 guys can play a few different spots for you. He can play end. He can obviously play 5 technique, which is the big end in the 3-down look. I think he can play outside in a 7 or a 9 technique in certain looks, so that's the 4-down line. I think in a 4-down line, he could also play 3 technique in time, where he can be more of a penetrator and use his athleticism, especially in, when you're playing spread teams or, a USC who likes to throw it a ton and doesn't run it much, and 3rd down, things like that. I think he can be an inside guy. And I actually think Tyson Ford could play nose in some of those positions as well. Again, I'm not saying an every down nose. I'm talking about in 3rd down, pass rush situations, or against teams that just throw the ball a ton. So USC didn't have an average 100 yards a game last year. If you were to have Tyson Ford at nose tackle, or a player like Tyson Ford at nose tackle in some situations in that game, it's going to help you, not hurt you, in my opinion. So right now, I would argue that Notre Dame has the best defensive end group in the country in Ford, Gabera, and Agu. Donovan Heinisch, we know what he brings to the table. That's a solid pickup. To me, for this to be a truly elite defensive line class, I think this group, as it is right now, closes the gap. It does. I think with that end class and a high motor, high energy, high character kid like Donovan Heinisch, it closes the gap. Does it get you all the way there? No, it doesn't. But it closes the gap. The thing that to me can get you all the way there is Anthony Lucas. Now, Cyrus Moss would be a great pickup. I think Cyrus Moss has a ton of talent. I'd still recruit Cyrus Moss. Although with getting Keon Keeley, I wouldn't necessarily be opposed if they decided, with Gabera, with Agu, now we have Keon Keeley, we're going to put all of our efforts into the Anthony Lucas kind of basket, then I would be all for that, right? Put all your chips in that and on that one. So that's not an easy thing to say because Cyrus Moss is really good. But number 1, I don't think they're necessarily in a great place for Cyrus Moss. In order to get him, they're going to invest a lot into him, and then you could still lose him. And then maybe that takes away a little bit from your push on Anthony Lucas. To me, if I'm Notre Dame, and tomorrow I'll have even more reasons why I feel this way. I'm going to feel this way now. It's going to make more sense tomorrow. But I feel like you're going to be so good at end that pure ends that I want a guy like Anthony Lucas. And the reason I say that is I think Anthony Lucas can play anywhere along the Notre Dame defensive line except for Viper in a 3 and a 4 down look. I think Anthony Lucas, and we've talked about this for months, he's my top guy on the board. He can play end, he can play 5 tech, he can play 3 tech, he can play nose, he can line up anywhere. He's a special player. He's the kind of kid Notre Dame doesn't get very often. If putting all your resources into him when it comes to defensive line recruiting for the next 6 months is what you need to do to get him, then do it. I think he's that good. I think he can make that big of a difference on the defensive line. He's the difference between having a gap closing haul, which is what they already have, and a gap, or the gap is gone haul. And that's, to me, that's how good Anthony Lucas could be. So where do things stand with him to make that happen? I think Notre Dame is in a good place. I think that Notre Dame is in that upper echelon of schools that he really likes. He's been to Bama, Miami's in there, Texas A&M is in there, Oregon is in there. I don't think he's in decision-making mode. I think Notre Dame impressed him a lot. I think he comes from a family that the things that Notre Dame is strong on, besides just football, but the academic piece, I think is going to be very attractive to Anthony's family and to Anthony. So I think that helps them. But now it's about setting forth a vision that he can be the best he can be at Notre Dame on and off the field. And I really believe for that to happen, Notre Dame has to put all their resources into him. I really do. And I think that sometimes you've got to make those tough calls as a coaching staff. And I think that's one that I would make. And I don't think you made up enough ground with Cyrus Moss. And I also don't know if now that you have Keon Keeley, Cyrus Moss is as big of a need for you. Although he's still, again, an excellent player. I think Anthony Lucas, to me, is the bigger need. He's a game changer. And I think that they've got a shot there. I feel like they're definitely in the game. I would say they're definitely in the top 3 schools. I would even argue that there's been periods during this process where you could even say Notre Dame might be standing above all the others. But there's a difference between leading for him in May or June and getting him to sign on the dotted line. And to get him to sign on the dotted line right now, I would make the decision that, and I would even tell him, hey, look, we had some other guys on the board. We're not talking to anybody else right now. You're it. You're the difference between us having a good line class and us taking that next step. That's what I would tell Anthony Lucas. And I think that's a pitch that could work. Not that he wants to be the guy and he would want you to drop anyone else. It's not about that. It's just about showing him how important he is to you. And that's where I would be. So and again, this whole defensive board, it's down to just a few guys. And now it's about closing out on those guys. So then you look next, let's go to linebacker and break down where things stand with Notre Dame and linebacker recruiting in the 2022 class. Notre Dame came into this class in need of a big group, and they needed a talented group. When you look at not signing any linebackers in 2020, you signed 2 in 2021, including one who may come for a freshman, then go on a mission, who may go on a mission first. And he's a guy that is a bit of a down-the-road project. Hanu Kia is that guy. And obviously you got Prince Colley in 2021, which is a great pickup. But numbers, you have issues. You have impact talent beyond really, again, in 2 years, you brought in one impact linebacker in Prince Colley. You needed depth and you needed impact depth. And it's been a great start for Notre Dame. It couldn't have been better. You got Nolan Ziegler to start things off. Marcus Freeman gets hired, gets them in the mix with several players, is able to get Josh Burnham in the fold, went up to Michigan, beat Michigan for a kid that grew up a Michigan fan. Josh Burnham is now locked into Notre Dame. Family loves Notre Dame. He's locked in. He was a huge pickup. He's not getting talked about a lot because a lot of the focus now is on guys that they are still trying to recruit. But Josh Burnham, if Notre Dame signs Jaylen Snead or gets Jaylen Snead, as of right now, Josh Burnham would still be my number 1 linebacker. Jaylen Snead's right on his heels, but Burnham would be my number 1 linebacker. Of the players that they've signed or got commitments from, he's the only one that has a 5-star upside for me. Jaylen Snead would be the second. So that was a big pickup. They're in a great position. All 3 of those guys can play together, but they've wanted 4 linebackers from the beginning. At the very least, since Marcus Freeman's been here, 4's been the target number. He wanted Junior Tuihalamaka as his Mike. He set his sights right away on Josh Burnham as a versatile guy that can move all over. And the other player that he set his sights on is Jaylen Snead. And we're going to kind of talk about where things stand and what you need to do to be an elite group at the same time, because there's only one guy on the board. And Jaylen Snead is the difference between Notre Dame having one of the best linebacker hauls in the country. And right now, I think they're the best, but some other teams could sign some guys that could challenge Notre Dame for it. If they get Jaylen Snead, there is no one else in the country that can put together a better linebacking core than what Notre Dame would have. You'd have 3 top 100 players in your class with Snead, Tuihalamaka, Burnham. And then Nolan Ziegler, I think, has a higher ceiling than at least one of those guys that's a top 100 player. And I think he's already seen a jump in his junior year, and I think Nolan could see another jump in his senior year. I saw some lacrosse film of him, and he has gotten bigger. He's filled out. He's faster. He's more explosive. I'm really looking forward to seeing what he's going to do as a senior. It would not shock me if all 4 of those guys end up ranked in the top 150 when it's all said and done, if not the top 100. It can be that good. And there's a lot of versatility. Everyone on there can play at least 2 positions, and most of those guys can play 3. Tuihalamaka is the only one for me that can't play 3. The others can play at least 3 positions. So that versatility and that complementary nature of those linebackers adds to how good it is. So where do things stand with Jaylen Snead? Well, it's down to Notre Dame and Oregon. I would expect if he's not committed to someone in the next week, I'll be surprised. And right now, with where things stand, I feel really good about where Notre Dame is. Obviously, they got to close out and all that kind of stuff, but I feel very, very, very good about where things stand with Jaylen Snead. And if he makes his announcement when I expect him to make his announcement, then I'm going to continue to feel good. If things drag out, then I might get a little bit worried. But right now, I think Notre Dame is in a great position. They've done a phenomenal job recruiting Jaylen Snead, and I see him ending up in the class. So let's get to the secondary. Cornerback is an interesting deal right now. The board's small. There's only 3 guys left on the board. They've already got a commitment from Jaden Mickey. They came into this class looking to get 2 to 3 corners, and they want at least one that can be multiple. The idea being that Notre Dame would like to, when they go nickel, to have a 3rd corner on the field as opposed to a 3rd safety. That is some intel that I've gathered, which is why you're seeing Notre Dame recruit more corners than they are safeties, even though you could argue that there's more of a need for a safety from a number standpoint. But what Notre Dame is doing, and I really love this strategy, is they're recruiting a lot more of a bigger corner bodies and bigger corner talents, in that I would, if I have to move someone, I'd rather bring in a bunch of corners that are really talented and see who wins those spots in the top 2. And then of those players, somebody's going to say, hey, you know what? This guy may not be our starting corner, but this kid can go play safety. And now you're bringing coverage ability and length to the safety position, as opposed to bringing in a pure safety. They're not opposed to bringing in pure safeties. They are 2 on the board that we'll get to that they really want. But I also don't think they're going to force the issue at safety if they can get more corners. We saw that last year when they signed 4 corners and 2 safeties. This year, they've already got 1 corner committed, and they're trying to get more. I think there's a scenario in which Notre Dame would bring in all 3 of those guys left on the board. When you look at what needs to happen for Notre Dame to kind of have that needle-moving class, I think you need at least one of the top 2 guys on that board. The ideal scenario is that you get Moore and Morrison. That's the ideal scenario. And then you bring in a kid like Jaden Bellamy. And the interesting thing about Bellamy is he plays safety as a junior, played corner as a sophomore. He played corner at St. John Vianney in Jersey, transferred to Bergen Catholic as a junior where he played safety. I actually like him more as a safety than I do a corner. I think he can run, and I think he's versatile. And that's 2 things I like. But he's still a little bit of a project as a pure corner. And so, but there's talent there. And again, versatile, he can hit, he's smart, and he can run. So there's value there. And he's going to make his announcement on June 2nd, which is going to be Friday. So in 3 days. And right now, I love where Notre Dame is at. So they're in a good place for him ahead of his commitment, barring things changing. I feel like that one's going to go well for Notre Dame. Now the question is okay, well, what about the other 2 guys? Moore and Morrison, coming out of their visits, Notre Dame was in a great place with both of them. They're still in a great place with Devin Moore, but he's in a similar situation to Tobias Merriweather and C.J. Williams in that Notre Dame is his leader now. If he commits this summer, I feel it's going to be Notre Dame. But he's also thinking about taking his recruitment in the fall. Now, the danger and the concern I have is if these kids are wanting to carry their commitments in the fall, it tells me they're not as sold on Notre Dame as maybe Notre Dame thinks they are. And that's because maybe they're uncertain of Notre Dame. They may not even have another school in mind. It could just be, I'm not certain. I'm not completely sold on Notre Dame. I want to take my time, which I respect. But for Notre Dame, That's not ideal because with Devin Moore, for example, it gives Alabama, it gives Florida, it gives programs like that more time to convince him, no pun intended, that you need to be here, not Notre Dame. And that's concerning. With Benjamin Morrison, Notre Dame was in a great position. Washington quickly closed the gap on Notre Dame. Now it's an uncertain deal. I've had people reach out and ask me that have said to me, they've asked me if Notre Dame would still take Benjamin Morrison, could he be out of a spot? From my sources, there's no way Benjamin Morrison's not going to have a spot if he wants to come to Notre Dame. If he wants to be at Notre Dame, then he'll be at Notre Dame. That's what my intel has given me, and I feel very, very confident in that. So I think they would take all three of those guys, to be honest with you, and make it work is what I think you could do, which that'd be a lot of DBs in 2 years, but I think they know that they need an overhaul at that position, and they're trying to bring in as many long athletic kids as they can. Right now, if I had to predict, I would say that I feel good about where things stand with Devin Moore. I feel really good about where things stand with Jaden Bellamy. To me, for them to truly have the kind of cornerback class that definitely moves the needle, even if it's a little bit, is you have to have one of the first two. If they strike out on the first two players and get Bellamy, that's with Jaden. I love Jaden Mickey, you know that. But Mickey and Bellamy is not the same kind of corner class as Mickey and Moore or Morrison. And it's definitely not the same kind of class as Mickey with one of Moore and Morrison and Bellamy. So I do think that the key to this group is Bellamy is a good piece. I like Jaden Bellamy a lot. I love his versatility, but you have to get one of those. If we're being honest, you have to get one of those first two guys. And you look at Jaden Bellamy, and I have a 3.5-star grade. That's really because he's got really raw technique. His grade took a bit of a dive from a technique standpoint at corner and safety. As a safety, I graded him out more as a hybrid player as opposed to a pure corner. I have concerns about his frame for safety, although his game fits it. And then I have concerns about his game at corner. And again, it's just because we haven't seen him a ton. We saw him as a sophomore, very raw technical. He's a very high IQ football player, and he's very instinctive, which is good. So I like Jaden Bellamy. He's got some tools. And if you look at his offer list, I mean, his final six included Ohio State, Clemson, Notre Dame, Penn State. There's some really good schools on there. So you don't normally see a 3-star kid with that kind of offer list. And I think that should tell you something about the potential that people believe Jaden Bellamy has. So this is not a knock on Jaden Bellamy as just about you need a second pure corner in the class. And I think Morrison and Moore certainly would be that guy. So it's a little bit of a trickier spot at corner now than it was a couple weeks ago, if we're being honest. It's going to be about closing. And this is where Marcus Freeman and Mike Mickens really need to finish strong. I mean, obviously linebacker's been great, but where Marcus Freeman really has to make his money as an elite recruiter, and I think he's becoming one, or at least we're seeing that there evidence of him being one, it's going to have to be in the secondary. It's going to have to be, he has to play a big role in them closing on one of Moore or Morrison, and hopefully both, but at least one of them. He has to do for Notre Dame what Jimmy Lake has done for Washington. And Washington's been a big pain in Notre Dame's side for years. Notre Dame got him last year in the secondary with Chance Tucker. They wanted Chance Tucker. Notre Dame beat him. So that was a little feather in Mike Mickens' cap. But now they need to try to do that again and get Morrison. And then, of course, they need to be able to get Devin Moore. You get that. If you get all four guys on this board, then Notre Dame is now set at corner for a long time. And now the focus in 2023 is strictly about get the elite guys, get AJ Harris. I mean, you could honestly make an argument that if they got all three of those guys, or at least two of them, of the additional guys, that you could say to Notre Dame, okay, if you get it, it's AJ Harrison done in 2023. I mean, you could make that case at corner. And that's how strong they would be when you also consider what they did last year. If you get all three of them, then that's a no-brainer. And the other thing, too, is at least two guys in that class have the ability to play safety if the need arises. And I also think with Jaden Mickey, I think Jaden Mickey could be a great slot player. When I think of Jaden Mickey, I think he can play outside. This is not saying he can't play outside, but I could see a role for him in a defense to where even if he's a starter, when you go nickel, you move him inside because teams will do that. You're starting the base defense outside, but when we go nickel, you're the one that bumps inside. We don't necessarily bring in a nickel corner. And you talk about Jaden Mickey doing for Notre Dame's defense a lot like what Sean Crawford did in 2017. I could definitely see that kind of role for Jaden Mickey, and I really like him there a lot. So that would give them that flexibility 3 corners on the field together. And there's several guys in that group that do that. And let's finish up with safety recruiting. So obviously Notre Dame does not have any commitments to safety right now. They want at least one. There's only 2 guys on the board. I reached out to sources in the last couple days just to make sure that this is true, and it is true. There's just one guy. There's just 2 guys on the board. They're putting all their chips in the Xavier Noah, Jake Pope basket. And I think I just combined metaphors there, but you know what I'm talking about. To me, they have to get at least one of those guys. And right now, I feel best about Jake Pope. I think with Jake Pope, I think Notre Dame, he recently came out with a Final 5. He said he's going to announce soon. It's Notre Dame, Ohio State, North Carolina, Alabama, and I think Georgia. Georgia's not really a player. It's Notre Dame, North Carolina, Ohio State, and Alabama are really the only players. I think ultimately it's going to be a Notre Dame, North Carolina, Ohio State battle in the end. And I feel good about where Notre Dame is right now. You've got to close the deal. This could be a big win for Chris O'Leary, but he's got to finish it off, and he's got to get him into class. We've talked a lot about Jake Pope. I think Jake Pope is a gap closer, but he's more of the second category of gap closer, that it adds depth to what you have. It adds talent to what you have. It doesn't necessarily take you a big step forward, but it improves your roster. And when you improve your roster, it means you're closing the gap. And I think Jake Pope can be that kind of guy. I love his athleticism. I love his versatility. He's a kid that could play nickel. He could play both safety positions, and he could play receiver if you needed him to. Hopefully that doesn't come to be, but he brings some of those traits to the table. Then it's about Xavier Noah. And I think the ideal perfect world scenario for Notre Dame, this is what they would like, is to get both of those guys. They would be happy with just one, but they want both. And I think they look at Pope and Nwangpa as great complements to each other. They can both play center field. They can both play in the alleys. They bring different skill sets. Nwangpa is more of a rangy guy. Pope is more of an explosive guy. They're both excellent players, and I think they'd like to have both of them in the class. With Xavier Noah, I have not gotten a lot of intel on that. It's to me, it's still an Ohio State Notre Dame battle. I think the fact that Ohio State doesn't feel good right now, from what I'm told, talking to sources, makes me feel like Notre Dame is in a tough battle there, but a much better place than they were at the beginning of the month. Now, he could still end up going to Ohio State. Ohio State's still a player for him, but the longer this plays out, I truly believe the better it is for Notre Dame. And that could also just be by process of elimination. I don't think Ohio State is willing to wait on him. And this, if I was Notre Dame, this is something that I would sell. Ohio State's talking about you need to commit because there's other guys that they may bring and all. If you're Notre Dame, say, Xavier, if you don't want to commit right now, if you want to wait till December, if you want to wait till February, we don't care, man. We're always gonna have a spot for you. We want you in the class. And whereas Ohio State's trying to say, hey, look, we need you to do it soon. We have other guys. They're going to get Zion Branch and all those kind of things. Already got Kai Stokes at safety. Whereas Notre Dame's like, dude, you're our guy. You're our guy. You are the number one player on our board. We would take you no matter what. I think that's something that's working in Notre Dame's favor right now, and is something that ultimately, if they can play the long game here and keep him just don't commit to Ohio State right now. If you're going to commit to Ohio State, wait. Just come visit us in the fall. Come for the Toledo game, Purdue game. We don't care. Just come visit us in the fall. And again, the longer it plays out, the better it is for Notre Dame. But I think Notre Dame is at least a 50-50 shot right now with Xavier Noah, and I feel like they're in front for Jake Pope. And as long as they can close on Jake Pope, then again, if Jake Pope's on board soon, if Jaylen Snead gets on board soon, and I feel good that both is going to happen, now there's really 2 prospects on the board that, you have the corners, but like you have the 2 corners because Jaden Bellamy is going to commit soon. You got Moore, Morrison, Nwangpa, and Lucas at that point in time. If Pope and Snead and Bellamy join the class. Again, hypothetical. If that happens, you say, okay, now you're putting all your defensive resources into that group. And if you do that, then I feel like Notre Dame is going to have a chance to have a truly, truly elite class. And here's the other thing I hope too. If they get Jake Pope, they're comfortable there. I mean, to the point where they've dropped other safeties. There's no plan B at safety. There's just plan A. So if Xavier Noah commits to Ohio State, keep recruiting him. If Anthony Lucas committed somewhere else, keep recruiting him. If Benjamin Morrison recruits to Washington, keep recruiting him. That's what I'd like to see Notre Dame do, because you don't have the need for anybody else. That's your guy. Stay on him. And that's what I would do. And especially if Ohio State starts loading up, with safeties in next year's class and things like that, I'd stay on them. I would keep pushing for them. And so when I look at offensive recruiting, I think overall, I feel you're in a situation where Notre Dame is in position to go out and add at least few more, 3 to 4 more skill players. They have to close on where they are now. I feel good about where they are now. If they can close the way that I think they're capable of closing this summer, then they're going to have a great class. If they can't close this summer and kids take it in the fall, then it's going to be more of a battle and it becomes a little bit trickier. Offensive line is a battle right now. You've got to get Shrouth or Rice. Right now, Notre Dame is in a battle in a not great looking situation with both, but they're still battling. And that's the key. They're still fighting. And when you're fighting and the kid's still listening, you got a chance. And this is an opportunity for Coach Kelly to really prove his chops as a recruiter. And I think he has the chops as a recruiter, which is why I've been begging him to recruit more. If he's able to pull off this Billy Shrouth thing with Tommy Rees, that's going to bode very, very well for Notre Dame as a recruiting force, because it's just not something we've seen happen a lot over the years. It's something he's capable of doing, but if he can do that, that would be huge. Defensively, the chips are there. I mean, the pieces are there. The pieces are in place for Notre Dame to have a truly special defensive haul. I feel better about them getting those players on defense than I do offense, but if they're able to finish strong on offense, look, I've laid out the case for Notre Dame to have a top 3 class. It's Singleton, it's Williams, it's Merriweather, it's Shrouth or Rice, it's Anthony Lucas, it's Jaylen Snead, it's one of Moore and Morrison and Bellamy, and it's you've got to get Pope and Nwankpa. You do that, and it's doable. Then to me this is a top 3 class, not top 5 class. This is a top 3 class. And so that's where Notre Dame is at. So that to me is the state of Notre Dame recruiting as of it stands right now. We've talked about everybody that's currently on the board. We've talked about where things stand with those kids. And we've talked about what Notre Dame needs to do to get over the hump. And so that's going to do it for that aspect of the show. And now we're going to dive into questions. So if you have questions, I'm going to go through them now. I don't know if any have been bumped off. I'm going to start with Tommy Leonard. Starts off with the IB Nation. If you had a question before that, please resubmit it, because that's where it is when I got in. It looks like you guys were in here so early because this comment was over an hour before the show started. Guys are getting in so early that by the time we get into the show, some questions are already booted. So just so you know, if you get in too early, unfortunately, there is a chance that your question may not be there, because StreamYard only gives us so many questions at a time. So I'm going to try to get through these as quickly as possible so I don't lose all that many. I'm not going to – Justin Herwick, I see your question about Coach Quinn. This isn't the show for that. Let's talk about that on the Friday show, if you don't mind, Justin. I'd love for you to come back and bring it up then. I want to stick to recruiting for the most part in this show, and that one is going to kind of go off in a completely different direction that I don't necessarily want this show to go. So if you don't mind, could you come back and bring that up on Friday in the mailbag? No problem addressing that question. It's a very fair question. I just would rather address it when we're not doing more of a recruiting show. Tatted Up Irishman, how are we looking for Bellamy? He is announcing soon, right? Just to reiterate, he is planning on. He announced that he will make his commitment on June 2nd or July 2nd, excuse me, which is going to be Friday. And right now, Notre Dame feels really good about where they stand with him. So he's in a good place. Tommy Lawson says, maybe we'll start with something good like Snead just committed. Unfortunately, that is not the case. He is not publicly committed yet. I do expect that to happen relatively soon. Jordan Schreiber asks, hi, Brian, how's the day? Day's going good so far. How many silent commits does Notre Dame have? I'll say 4 as of right now. They have 4 as of right now that I'm confident in. I mean, there's a couple other guys that have said they're coming, but I'm coming, and I'm a little bit more worried about those guys. But as far as guys I feel good about 4. Richard Maltby says, how is it that a top-tier offensive lineman like Zach Rice would be choosing any program besides Notre Dame and Alabama? There's nothing overly attractive about North Carolina or Virginia. Okay, first of all, there's one thing very attractive about both programs, and that is they both have gorgeous campuses. So, I mean, if you want to talk about attractiveness, they have beautiful campuses. I've been to both. I'm from that area. They're gorgeous campuses. Virginia is also an outstanding academic institution, and not just in the state of Virginia. It is an outstanding academic institution for anywhere. And so I do think that's an attractive part. And I think North Carolina is a lot more attractive than you think it is. I think North Carolina is an ascending program. You have a Hall of Fame coach that's got a national championship ring at the Division I level, something Notre Dame does not have. And that's not a shot on Coach Kelly at all. I think Brian Kelly is a heavyweight, in my opinion. I'm just making the case that it's not just it's not Larry Fedora coaching North Carolina. It's Mac Brown. You've got legends on that coaching staff. Dre Bly is on that coaching staff, and they are recruiting extremely well. There's been a lot of highly ranked, talented kids from the Mid-Atlantic commit to North Carolina in the last couple of years, and Zach Rice knows that. And so, absolutely, it's an attractive place. And yes, Notre Dame is O-line U, and Alabama is, obviously in Oklahoma are the next two programs when it comes to that. But some kids kind of like the idea of being a trailblazer, not just following in the path of who has come before me, but hey, I want to blaze my own trail. And I have no problem with that. Now, do I think he'll end up picking one of those schools? I could see it, especially North Carolina. But they're players for him. But I understand why. I mean, again, I get where you're coming from too, Richard. But if you think about it, the guy who built the elite lines at Alabama in recent years is not there anymore. He's now the offensive line coach at Texas, right? Kyle Flood's not there. I mean, he left. They've got Doug Marrone coaching their offensive line now. He hasn't coached any of those Alabama guys in the past. So that's going to hurt Alabama. And even though Notre Dame had a good line in 2020, a very good line in 2020, the reality is the guy that built O-line U for Notre Dame is not there anymore either. And we can't pretend like that doesn't matter to these kids, because obviously when you watch how recruiting is going, it does matter to these kids. Even if Notre Dame gets Billy Shrouth, they're not getting Billy Shrouth because of Jeff Quinn. They'd be getting him because of Tommy Rees and Brian Kelly. And so that's kind of how I'd answer that. And again, I understand where your question's coming from. Completely get it. But I can see it a little bit more than you can, especially because, too, I don't know where you're from, Richard, but like being from the Mid-Atlantic myself, North Carolina, when they were good, was a really attractive draw to kids in the Mid-Atlantic area. I mean, top recruits. I remember Deion Dyer, who I was from my region in high school. I didn't play against him, but he was from my region in high school, where I grew up. Actually, no, yeah, we didn't. We would have played them the next round. They beat us. We got beat by Indian River in the playoffs. But obviously, Dre Bly went there. I mean, that was Ronald Curry went there. That's a really attractive place to Mid-Atlantic kids. And Zach Rice being from Virginia, and he's from southwestern Virginia, so Lynchburg is down somewhat close to the North Carolina border. It's a lot more attractive to kids from there than it might seem to a lot of other people who aren't really from there. But it's a fair question. Tommy Lawson says, I think Anthony Lucas is just as important as Snead, if not more. I think Anthony Lucas is arguably the most important recruit on the board, regardless of position. So I certainly agree with you there, Tommy. Jojo Pineda, good afternoon, IB Nation. I know you were having trouble yesterday with the weather and the live show. I hope you guys are safe. A news with Snead or Singleton. So obviously we talked about that earlier. I feel really good where Notre Dame is with both kids. Really good. Jacob Watson, who are the recruits you are most confident in and why? Not in 2023 class either. So just 2022. So just going down the list, I'd say if I were to say the five players I'm most confident in Notre Dame getting right now, I would say Jaden Bellamy, Jaylen Snead, Jake Pope, Nicholas Singleton, and Nicholas Anderson. That's the five I'm most confident in. I also feel really good about where they're at with CJ Williams and Tobias Merriweather, but I've given you the huge caveat there. It's about timing for them. Devin Moore, and I'd throw in the same category as Williams and Merriweather. So that even though I think Notre Dame is the leader for all three of those kids, the fact that they're all contemplating not committing soon and maybe waiting till the fall kind of has me not as confident as the other five kids who I believe all will be summer commitments. So that's where I break it down. Jacob also asks, where do you think Notre Dame will have the most success with commits they are looking to add, not ones currently committed? So based on what I just said, the kind of the first part of the question that you asked, I feel like they'll have the most success with commits they're looking at linebacker, running back, and secondary is where I think that they'll have the most success. Okay, let's get to some more questions here. Ryan Michael says, I saw Nicholas Singleton get another crystal ball on 247, a 5 confidence, Wilt Fong, Brian Doan, along with some Notre Dame guys. That makes 5 for him. Would be a great running back class with him. I always kind of find it funny that let me say this. The crystal ball thing at 247, although I hate it, and I've expressed why, it's a brilliant marketing. I mean, Shannon Terry and the guys that created 247, it was really genius. Because they've turned it into like this its own. It's like a living organism, right? Like the crystal ball says that Notre Dame's trending. They'll write that in stories, and it's really brilliant. And I'm not being sarcastic. I'm literally giving them props. And people will put a crystal ball up. I mean, this happens to me almost on a daily basis. Somebody will put a crystal ball in Notre Dame's favor or in favor of another school, and I'll have at least 5 people hit me up like, "Hey, did you see this?" And I'm like, yeah, I saw that the crystal ball was put up, which confirms what I've been telling you for 2 weeks. But because I don't have that singular crystal ball, it's like it doesn't register. So even though they already know the information, they already know that because they've listened to the show or read the site that Notre Dame is really good here. Once the crystal ball goes up, it's like epiphany. And they feel the need to text me. And it's cool. I have no problem with it. It's a compliment. It's a really great marketing thing and thing, because now it's like people are just it's in there. It's in our heads, as a college football fans, that when that happens, it's like it's as if it's news when it's not really news, because I've been telling you for a couple weeks now. Tom Lloyd's been telling you for a couple weeks now that it looks really good with Nicholas Singleton, but because a crystal ball was put up, oh, that must mean something's changed. No, nothing's changed. That's the same thing we've been telling you for 2 weeks. So props to the people that came up with that. And I'm not being sarcastic. I really mean that. I wouldn't do it. And I have my personal issues with it, which I've expressed. But from a company standpoint, it was a really ingenious idea. And I truly mean that. Jojo Pineda says, hey, hi, Coach D. Did we improve our chances with Moore, the quarterback from Michigan? I don't know that I would say that they improved their chances, because it's really early with him. What I think it does is solidifies that Notre Dame will be a player for him. And this is the thing I've said all along about him. I don't think he's a lock to Michigan. And I don't think this is going to come down to where he's only going to go to Notre Dame, Ohio State, or Michigan. I think he's going to be a national recruit. And I think had he not visited Notre Dame this summer, it would have been a very bad sign. The fact that he did come on campus, it was the perfect weekend for him to be on campus, because you didn't have as many guys and you only had 2 guys on offense. It gave them a chance to really spend some time with him, where in other weekends or midweek things, because Notre Dame did a lot of camps this summer. And if he would have come during one of the camps, maybe they could have convinced him to work out, but you don't need to see Dante Moore work out. He's an elite player. But it would have been harder for you to spend the kind of time on him that you would have needed to spend on him. So getting him on campus when they did was really perfect timing. You're really the last message he's going to get this summer in a face-to-face situation. I think it was perfect for Notre Dame. Perfect timing. And you had a chance to kind of make your pitch. And he showed you that he has legit interest in you, because he did get on campus. Now the next step is just convincing him why this is a move for you. And I was asked the other day, I can't remember who asked it, and I apologize, but somebody said, hey, if Notre Dame comes out this year and performs really well and they put up points and Jack Cohn has a really big year, and just it was more of a change the offense kind of thing, will help with recruiting. I think where it's going to help the most is a quarterback. I think if they have an offense that's more geared towards RPOs and quick game and just a more quarterback friendly offense, because let's be honest, Notre Dame's offense under Brian Kelly has not been overly quarterback friendly in many ways. If that changes in 2021 with Coach Reese leading the way, I think where it's going to have the biggest impact is with 2023 recruiting quarterbacks. That's where I think it's going to have the biggest impact. Ryan Michael also says, now we need to catch back up and close in Wisconsin for Shrouth. Read on Rivals or 247 that BK has been all over him, getting him back, and they're feeling a little better about that situation, which is what I told you already as well. Jacob Watson, Brian, is there any comparison with Bellamy and Pride? Do you see them being a similar player? I imagine you're talking about Troy Pride. I don't really see a lot of scenarios. I think Troy was a lot faster. And that's not a knock on Bellamy. Troy was really, really fast. I think Troy was a more explosive athlete, and I think Troy was more of a natural corner. I think the similarity is that they were both raw technically. Troy was a pure corner to me. Jaden Bellamy is more of a safety game in a corner body right now. And now that doesn't mean he can't play corner. Notre Dame wants to get him and try him at corner and give him a legitimate chance at corner, but they also appreciate the fact that he can be versatile. I think he has a lot more versatility than Troy Pride had, where Troy Pride was an outside corner. I mean, that's what Troy Pride was. So I think the only other comparison I would make is probably body type is a little bit similar. You know, Troy was about 6 foot. Jaden's listed between 5'11" and 6'1". He looks closer to 5'11". Good length, good body, skinnier body size. So their bodies are similar, but their games aren't a whole lot similar. D-Rock, time to let it rip. Good afternoon. Because D-Rock, actually, this is the first question that was like right at that 1 o'clock time. And so it just kind of shows how early people are getting in here. I still haven't got to the 1 o'clock time slot yet, which I love. I appreciate all y'all. Ryan Michael says, good question, Jacob. Speaking of Bellamy, and that was the question about Bellamy and Pride. If he commits soon, would they still take Morrison, Moore, Xavier, and Pope? That would be 6 DBs. How do you predict the DB class ending as of today? So as we kind of talked about this during the show, I think they would take all those guys. From my intel, I think they would take all those guys. And it'd be 2 years in a row of 6 DBs, which would be a lot of DBs in 2 years, but this is a defense that ultimately wants to be able to go 5 DBs. So you'd have a 2 deep everywhere and then 2 guys that could play other positions. And then obviously it would give you some flexibility if you want to, find a role for Kerry G and Justin Walters as sort of in the box guys as safeties, but like in a nickel and a dime, it would give you flexibility to kind of get another athlete on the field in certain situations. Not that I'm saying you're going to move you to those guys to rover a linebacker. I'm just saying you could see a scenario in which you go 6 DBs where maybe you have 3 corners on the field, 2 safeties, and then maybe one of your third safety, a G, a Justin Walters, maybe a bigger bodied guy, where you're going to kind of have a 3-2-6 look almost like on third down or in 2-minute or against a USC kind of thing, where you get that other guy down and he's basically a de facto outside linebacker in that situation, but it's a safety guy and he's going to do the coverage and all those kind of things. Jack Sullivan asked, not recruiting related, but will you be able to attend fall practices in person? We have not got any updates on that, and I doubt we'll get any updates until we get closer to the season. And I have not great feelings about that, but I'll keep those to myself. Greg M says, is Notre Dame still recruiting kids who commit elsewhere like Dallin Hayden? Would they ever stop recruiting him? They would stop recruiting him if they get Nicholas Singleton, I think. And I don't know if Dallin's a guy that Notre Dame would continue to recruit. I think Ohio State, trying to flip a guy from Ohio State may not be the best use of your time. I think what they'd probably do is stay on Nicholas Singleton. If he commits to Penn State, I think they would probably stay on him, because I think they would know that maybe he likes Notre Dame more, but the other pressures led him to Penn State. Whereas with Hayden liked Ohio State more, and it was close, and you had to try to convince him that you were the better option. You didn't win that game. He's not going to stop liking Ohio State as much. So it's a little bit of a different scenario. So I think if they lost Singleton, which right now I'm not predicting, I think he's the guy that I would stay on. As far as guys that are committed elsewhere, right now they're not, because they don't need to be. There are still players on the board that are your A guys that you're going to try to go land. Now, if you lose out on some of the guys, Singleton, Lucas, Moore, Morrison, Nwakpa, if you miss out on some of those guys, then yes, you keep recruiting them. But the guys that have committed elsewhere already, I don't think those are guys that you're going to want to waste your time on yet. You reevaluate things after the summer. If you miss on some guys, you get some guys, you always reevaluate things, but there's not a lot of guys that I would be looking at that sense. Dan Clement says, hey, Coach, been listening, watching for a while now. Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that. I've been a Notre Dame fan since childhood. I am Irish and Catholic living in Michigan. First 2 things are good for you. Last thing, not so much. Love the show. I appreciate that very much, Dan. Appreciate that very much. Patrick Barnes says, Lance Taylor threw out the bat signal last night. Wonder who it is. It's a good question. Yeah, I don't know who that was. I will say this has nothing to do with what you're talking about, Patrick. But we will have a second show today. We'll have a second show today. It'll be sometime tonight. So just make sure you're locked into my Twitter account at CoachD178 for that news and the second show tonight. So we will have a second show tonight. Michael O'Brien, first-time poster, been in Notre Dame Subway since 1964. Love your show, Brian. Keep up the great work. I will. And for a second there, I kind of got excited. I thought maybe you were one of my former receivers from Christopher Newport named Michael O'Brien, but since you've been a Subway alum or fan since 1964, you're a little bit before when I would have been coaching. So welcome aboard, Michael. I appreciate it very, very much. Richard Robinson, I saw Dante Moore was in for a visit. He said good things, would be a gap eraser to lead to a national championship. Yes, and he'd be the second quarterback in 3 years that fits that mold. And that's the key. Because if you get one guy, which Tyler Buchner to me is, and he even if he pans out, okay, but what about when he leaves, right? So if Clemson doesn't get Trevor Lawrence, Clemson isn't where they are right now as a program. They would have fallen off. I mean, look, with all due respect to Kelly Bryant, the Kelly Bryant-led Clemson team looked a whole lot different than the Deshaun Watson and the Trevor Lawrence one. It just did. And, you know, they would not have 2 titles, that's for sure. And they probably wouldn't be in they probably would have missed a playoff or 2 in the years since. I truly believe that. And so, yeah, you need to keep it going. It can't just be one guy. And Buchner was the first, and you getting Dante Moore would be the next. That would be the ideal situation. And our next question. Jojo Pineda, Coach D, have you heard any beef between Notre Dame and Ohio State after Hayden committed? It was on Letterman Row YouTube video, and they maybe made it seem like Notre Dame coaches were bitter. I don't care what Letterman Row says. Notre Dame coaches were not bitter. They knew full well what might happen the weekend he went to Ohio State. There's no bitterness there. And that's why Notre Dame turned up the heat on Nicholas Singleton before Dallin Hayden committed. Notre Dame knew exactly what could happen that weekend. So, and I don't get into that petty stuff. Other sites can do, and Notre Dame sites don't play that game, at least not the ones that matter. So I'm not going to get into that. I don't care what Letterman Row says. They're not worth my time. Wally's, yes, that was it. Yes, Wally's Deli. Thank you, Michael. Hey, Coach, don't know if you saw last night with the shortened show, Wally's Deli on 17th Street is the home of the hog. Yes, that was it. Oh, next time I'm driving on the East Coast and I'm near Allentown, I got to go there. I'm writing that down. Excuse me real quick, folks. So for those of you that don't know why I'm reacting this way, when I lived in Allentown, when I coached at Muhlenberg, they had this sandwich shop, and it's Wally's Deli. Now, as soon as he said it, I remembered it. And they had this sandwich called a hog, and it was phenomenal. And my head coach at the time, Mike Donnelly, who was just – I learned so much football from him. I learned so much about being a man from him. He was someone who flat out could have been a Division I coach. He had offers to be a Division I coach. He was the D coordinator at Columbia when Marcellus Wiley was there. But he was a dad, and he felt like being at a Division III school and being a head coach was better for him as a father than, going somewhere else, which I respected him. He passed away after a battle with illness within the last couple of years. I actually did a show on him on CBS Sports, which was very, very well done. But, I didn't make a lot of money then. They we had a house that like 4 or 5 coaches stayed in, and I had the basement area, which was awesome because I had like my own living room and stuff. But anyway, he would say, hey, Brian, go get you and I lunch. And he'd give me, we'd go to Wally's and get hogs and stuff. And he'd give me like a 50 to pay for something was going to be like $15-20. And he'd say, I keep the change. And just to kind of help me out. He was a wonderful man. So I have a ton of great memories from Wally's Deli. So that's why I reacted the way that I did. And also I've only smoked a cigar probably twice in my life. I've never been a smoker, but I had my first cigar with my dad and Coach Donnelly and the coaching staff at Muhlenberg. My 1 year there, we beat Moravian College in our final game of the season, which, that was our big rival. But then we also felt like it was going to lock us into a postseason berth that year. And we ended up going to the postseason for the first time in school history, went to the NCAA tournament for the first time in school history, won our first round game by 50. But after we beat Moravian, we were at a bar that night and a restaurant, and Coach Donnelly handed out cigars. So I had my first cigar. My dad had to kind of show me what to do because I never smoked a cigar before. So that was a lot of great memories at Allentown. A lot of great memories. That was a great place, great kids, great people. Always remember that. So that's why I had the emotional reaction I did. It's not just because the sandwich was that good, which it was pretty good. Kevin Thomas says, maybe so. It wouldn't be confused as a KK bat signal, Keon Keeley. I'm not sure if it was purposeful late or not. Hopefully it's Tate Bowen more, but that's probably just wishful thinking. Yes, in that case of those three, that is wishful thinking. Okay. And real quick, I want to speak to this. If it was Taylor, it's got to be for Singleton, right? Listen, one coach doesn't put up a bat signal. I would imagine Lance Taylor was probably just late to the game. Okay. I've never seen a situation where one coach put up a bat signal for a player and nobody else did. So that's why they all do it. And so when you see all the different bat signals, so if Lance Taylor put one out super late, it was probably because he was just late to the game. Yeah, so I would encourage you not to try to figure out it based on it's because I've had this happen before. The reason I'm saying this is not just based on Tommy's comment, but the other day somebody the bat signal went out and somebody only saw the one coach that did it, so he assumed it was a certain player because it was the one coach. That's not how it works. So they all kind of put him out. Brent Pyers, Lance Taylor needs to get his tweets in order. Yes, he probably did. Probably did. Let's see here. Michael says, hey, fellas, I hope everyone is doing well. I enjoy all your comments and questions. Go Irish. Thank you for that. D-Rock says, Brian, when a longtime recruit or even a commit selects another school over Notre Dame, do the Irish coaches ask for specifics on why from those recruits? How detailed are those discussions? They will. Yeah, they will with some players if they have that kind of relationship. Because normally what happens, this is what happens, okay, is most of these kids – when they go and make an announcement, the coaches already know. And it's not just the coaches that they did. So, like, for example, recently some of the recent commits that Notre Dame has had, the reason that they didn't commit right away is because sometimes you want to do a video or get some kind of thing done. But then the other thing is they want to make sure that they call the coaches of the schools that have been recruiting that they have good relationships with. And sometimes those are really hard calls. Hey, coach, so-and-so, I'm just want to let you know I'm going to commit to Notre Dame and that kind of thing. And during those conversations, you may say, hey, look, I'm just curious, what could we have done different? Or was there something that, that we did or didn't do that whatever the case may be. And sometimes the kids will tell them, and sometimes they'll just say, hey, look, this is the right place for me and those kind of things. Because you have to be careful if you're a young man to say, well, hey, here's why. And then what you've done is not actually explain it to them why it's happening, but instead – you've given them the ammo that they need to keep recruiting you and try to flip you. So you have to be a little careful with that. But yeah, those conversations happen. I wouldn't say all the time, but they happen. Certainly. Notre Dame 2164. People are afraid we may lose some of these commits if Notre Dame has a down year. Down year for Notre Dame is 9-3 and 8-4. Are these concerns valid, or does it depend on the recruits? I don't think they're super valid. I mean, they didn't lose too many kids after going 4-8. I mean, they lost Pete Werner, but that wasn't because of the 4-8 year. They lost Donovan Jeter, but that kid was going to decommit no matter they went 4-8 or 10-2. They lost some, they lost a couple corners, but again, those were more because of actions taken by the coaches that were honestly, for a while there, it was looking like the Brian Kelly wasn't going to be back. And some of those coaches were sort of, looking for other places. Now, like Mike Elston kind of doubled down and said, well, screw it, I'm still going to keep battling. And that's how he found Myron Tungavaloa and all these other kind of things. That's actually a pretty cool story. I'm not sure if I can share it, actually. I'd have to get permission on that one. But he was still recruiting, but other coaches were kind of touching up their resumes and things like that. And I think that's why they lost some kids. But they didn't lose that many kids then. I mean, you never lost the 2018 kids. Drakrovic stayed recruited. You had Heinisch stayed committed. Avery Davis stayed committed. Michael Young stayed committed. Hainsey, Lugg, Banks, they all stayed committed. Dylan Gibbons stayed committed. I'm trying to think through that 2017 class. A lot of those kids stayed committed, even though we went 4-8. So I don't think they would lose many kids. I don't know if they'd lose any kids. I also don't expect Notre Dame to go 8-4. And I don't think 9-3 be considered a super down year by the kids. 8-4 would, but I don't see that happening. Tommy Leonard says, Brian just saw a report with 29 more guys alleging misconduct with Ohio State's former trainer. Do you think it could affect the football program there? Tommy, refresh my memory a little bit. That's from a while ago, right? Is that something that happened during like the Urban Meyer tenure? I don't think that's the case. And if it is, I don't see it affecting it. Unless it's someone that worked for the current staff, I don't think that's going to affect it at all. Brent Byers, where would you rank CJ Williams and Tobias Merriweather among the receiver recruits in the last several cycles? Like a big board of sorts, but only with Notre Dame wide receiver recruits. So if they get Tobias Merriweather and he projects the way that I think he is, he's probably one of the 3 or 4 best receiver recruits Notre Dame has landed in Brian Kelly's tenure. I mean, he's that good, in my opinion. He'd be up there with like Javon McKinley. And I'm just off the top of my head because I'd have to go back and look at the actual grades. But like the guys that I had ranked really high, I had DeVaris Daniels ranked very high in 2011. 2015, I liked Equinemi St. Brown quite a bit. 2016, I liked Chase Claypool and Kevin Stepherson quite a bit, and Javon McKinney. That, to me, was Notre Dame's best receiving corps class so far. That was that 2016 class. 2018, Kevin Austin is in that group as the highest, the best guy, one of the best guys. So that would be my kind of my 5-ish range, and I think Tobias is in that group. He has a chance to be as good as those guys. CJ is, to me, more of a Jordan Johnson type. And the thing I liked about Jordan Johnson and why I was frustrated with him not playing last year is he was kind of an advanced guy. He was a guy that was a good route runner, had really good ball skills. He was an explosive athlete, and he should have been used because he was more advanced. But he was never a guy that I said had a super, super, super high, Will Fuller type of ceiling. He was just more of a really good, he was more of a, trying to think of some receivers that would like him. But, I'd have to think of some comparisons, but, not an elite athlete, but a really polished receiver with really good ball skills. I had always said that I thought Xavier Watts had the higher ceiling than Jordan Johnson. So that's why he wouldn't necessarily be in there with me. So that's kind of where I would have him. But CJ's top 10 for sure. And he's definitely top 5 to 7 in as far as highest floors. His ceiling isn't just quite as high. But I think as a 1-2 punch, that to me would be the second best 1-2 punch behind Javon McKinley and Chase Claypool and then you had Kevin Stepherson third of the 2016 class. And that's saying something because I thought Javon McKinley was an elite player coming out of high school. No question about it. Zaywop says, Williams will be playing slot at Notre Dame, as he said in his interview. Don't know how the Claypool Boykin comparisons work. He's not going to play the slot all the time at Notre Dame. He's going to play. That's a pitch that they're giving him now. He's 6'2", 200 pounds. He's not going to be a full-time slot player. And the Claypool comparisons work because if you go back and watch Notre Dame in 2018 and you watch Notre Dame in 2017, Chase Claypool was their starting slot receiver in 2017. And there were plenty of times in 2018 when he would be playing the slot and you'd have Chris Fink outside in an inverted alignment. So that's how the Chase Claypool Miles Boykin comparisons work. And the other part of that comparison is that they have different skill sets, which was the entire point of the comparison. So yes, the comparison absolutely works. Coleman Smith says, watched Ashton Craig's film, Brian. I agree with you now. Good pickup. Good man. Watch the film. Always a good thing. Let's see here. Jordan Schreiber says, what do you have a Mauryan Walker graded at currently and upside? Let me look at that. It's been a while since I've looked at that, Jordan. So let me pull that up so I can give you the exact grade. I have him as a 3-star grade right now and a 4-star upside. So hopefully that bumps up to a 4 and a 4.5 by his senior year, but that's where he is right now. Coleman Smith says, what is the biggest difference play style wise between Stace and Raridan? I think the biggest difference right now is I think that Stace is an attached player that can line up outside, whereas Raridan is an outside player that can line up inside. And so, it's kind of like comparing, it's like you have a Troy Nicholas type and then you have an Alizé Mack type, right? Whereas Raridan is more of an Alizé Mack type in that Alizé was never at his best attached. He was a slot. He was moved around, that kind of thing. And Troy Nicholas was always at his best when playing an attached role. Their skill sets are different. I'm not saying that Ashton or Holden Stace is like Troy Nicholas. I think their games are different. But what I'm saying is, like, where one guy is an attached that can move, one is a guy that's more of a movement guy that can play attached. And of course, Holden 6'4", he's got a bigger body. Eli is taller, a little skinnier, more of a route runner type. Holden is stronger. So there's a lot of areas where their games are different. David Jones says, Brian, you've been very on the athleticism and playmaking ability of Xavier Turner Bradshaw, and now it seems as though that has simmered a bit. What has changed, if any? Nothing's changed for me. Nothing's changed for me. I just don't feel the need to come on, and this isn't a shot at you, Dave. It's just I'm just explaining it. I don't know. I think it'd be a really boring show, and would kind of. I wouldn't want to do it if all I was doing is every time we talked receivers, just go on a rant about how they're screwing it with Xavier Turner Bradshaw. Everybody knows how I feel about it by now, right? I think they should take him. My opinion of him as a player hasn't changed. All I'm doing as an analyst and someone that covers the team is trying to also be objective in that I'm also stating a case for why Notre Dame may not like him like I do. Because here's the deal, David. If Notre Dame thought about Xavier Bradshaw like I think about Xavier Bradshaw, he'd already be in the class. It'd be a no-brainer. So what I'm trying to do is, my stance. I've got a grade on him. I've said he's a top 100 player. He's a take for me. But I also am trying to be fair and say, here's why maybe the staff doesn't like him, or maybe, why they may view someone else as better, just to present a counter argument to that. That doesn't mean that that's what I think. My opinion of Xavier Turner Bradshaw has not changed at all. I would absolutely take him, but they don't think that. And so we can either sit here every show and I can complain about it and get mad about it and complain, and just turn it into a daily bitch session about why they're not recruiting Xavier Bradshaw, or we can say, look, they're not recruiting Xavier Bradshaw, and until that changes, it's just not something that we should continue to spend a lot of time on. So I've made my case on it, and it is what it is. Brent Byers says that would mean you likely lost to UNC, Wisconsin, USC, and Cincinnati, and that's not acceptable. Actually, Brent, this is about people talking about 8-4. I think it'd be different than that because I don't think they'd lose to all four of those teams. When you go 8-4, you rarely lose to the best teams you play. When Notre Dame went 4-8 in 2016, they beat a Miami team that won 9 games and was ranked, right? So they didn't just lose to the 8 best teams. They actually lost to some really bad teams that year. And so I don't think they'd lose to all 4. I think it'd be worse. They'd go 8-4, but they'd probably win one of those games, but then lose to a Virginia Tech or a Virginia or Purdue or something like that. That, which actually to me would make it worse. Let's get some more questions here. A lot of talk about games that they may or may not lose. We'll pass over kind of those. Allison T, very good question. How often do you give out 5-star current ratings? Allison, it's very rare. And part of that is because of the difference in how I evaluate and others. So it's a very inconsistent ranking to me when you look at how the 24/7 and those rivals do it, because they can only do the one grade. And so sometimes you'll see guys that are high 5 stars because they're really proven players now, but I don't see the ceiling. Other guys are just really toolsy, and so they rank them high even though that they've got lower floors. I give out very few 5 stars. I mean, if I'm sitting there thinking about it, since 2018, I'm trying to think the guy I gave a 5-star grade out to Phil Dracovic. And I think Kyle Hamilton. And I think that is it. I'm going to pull up the rankings. I don't think that I gave Michael Mayer a 5-star grade. Let's see here. I'm pulling up my article where I ranked those guys. He was my so Michael Mayer was my number 1 tight end, but I gave him a 4.5-star grade, which is a top 50 grade. Did not give him a 5-star grade. Chris Tyree also got a top 50 grade for me. Those were my top 2 players in the 2020 class. And then last year, Blake Fisher, I also gave a 4.5-star grade to. He was also my number 1 player. I did have a 5-star grade on Tyler Buckner early, but because of the fact that he didn't play his senior year and he only had 1 year and 3 that he played, that brought it down. Plus, he changed his throwing motion, which concerned me, and we never got a chance to see if he could play with it. So I think those are the things that I look at and see. But yeah, so I don't give out many 5-star grades because of the upside grade thing. I think that I try to have people focus more on the upside part of it. Now those I give more of those out, not a ton, but I give more of those out. Ty B, first time in the chat. Love the show. Thank you, Ty. I think Notre Dame will be a playoff team due to the fact that every first-year QB starter in Brian Kelly Ayers had success. That's a good point. So you had when Tommy Rees was a first-time starter, he went 4-0, right? Beat USC, beat Miami, beat Utah, right? Beat Army. Then Everett Golson in 2012 obviously had success, led him to the playoff. Malik Zaire and Deshaun Kaiser were both first-year starters at the same time. Malik obviously played very well until he got hurt. Then Deshaun played well. That was a really good Notre Dame team. Brandon Wimbush's first year as a starter, Notre Dame was pretty good. Yeah, that's Ian Book's first year as a starter. They went to the playoff. So, yeah, that's a really good point. It's a really good point. Although this is a little different because they do have a veteran quarterback, so they may not simplify things as much as they have in the past for first-year starters, which could be a problem. Let's see here. Nolan Esparza says, I feel for Drew Pine. If he's on campus anytime after Clausen leaves until 2 years ago, he is the starting quarterback. The kid seems to represent everything that makes Notre Dame great. I agree with that. I also don't think we should automatically assume he's not going to start at Notre Dame. Let's see here. Kevin Thomas, fantastic how LB was such a need for us, and Marcus Freeman came in as a great LB coach to help us turn that for us. Amazing timing, absolutely. Let's see here. Coach JoJo says, Coach D, if we don't get Anderson or Ao Menor, will they go harder for Bradshaw? I would imagine so, but I mean, they're not going to lose. They're not going to lose both of those guys. They're going to get at least one of those guys. All right, let's see here. So Kevin had his comment about Freeman. All right. A lot of conversation going on. And I'm going to try to actually get to some questions as we wrap up here. Okay, here we go. Brandon says, Brian, is it Pope or Bellamy, or could Notre Dame take all 6? Because I also saw Pope has a decision coming soon. There is no Pope or Bellamy. They are being recruited at 2 different positions. Bellamy is being recruited as a corner, and Pope is being recruited as a safety. And so that is, yeah, I think they would take all 6. From my conversations, I believe they would take all 6. Brandon says, Ethan Nation, Ryan Yates, and AJ Harris for 2023. Lock it in. They're not getting all 3 of those guys. That'd be amazing if they did, but they're not getting all 3 of those guys. I hope that they just get one of them. And AJ Harris to me is the best cornerback in the country, regardless of class. In high school, 22 or 23 is the best cornerback in the class. All right, Michael O'Brien says Notre Dame is at 16 currently. I see maybe at most 10 more commits and that going to 1 or 2 over, but I am sure that they can take 26 next year and the number works out good. All 6 DBs, no. I disagree with that. I think they can and will take all 6 DBs if they can get them. No question about it. Matthew Lass says, does TJ Dudley committing to Oregon yesterday signal that they feel they've lost on Snead and that Snead's commitment can be imminent? I mean, I don't know what else you want me to say about this, Matthew. I've said for over a week, for 2 weeks, that I feel really good about where things stand with Jaylen Snead. Beyond that, I have no more comments on it. We'll just have to let it play out. Brandon says, if Notre Dame gets Pope, Nwankpa, Bellamy, and Mickey, and then Moore and Morrison haven't committed, is it one of the 2, or do you think? Or again, I answered this question. I think somebody else asked. Maybe you asked it, but yeah, you asked earlier about all 6. I think they would take all 6. I do. I don't think they're going to get all 6, but I think they would take all 6. Ty B said, "Who's the flat-out best commit so far in the 2022 class?" So right now, my number 1 commit on defense is Tyson Ford, but that is probably going to change soon as I kind of go through and regrade everybody here as we get into the fall. But right now, Tyson Ford is my number one ranked defensive commit, and Joey Tanona is my number one offensive commit. But the three best commits in the class are Ford and Burnham and Gabera. I think right now are my top three. And as a matter of fact, I have 5 players on defense graded out higher than anybody on offense right now. So that goes down to Junior Tuihalamaka and Jaden Mickey. I have all 5 of those ranked higher than Joey Tanona, who's the best one on that board. Thomas, I appreciate the kind words. I see these questions about any news on guys. I mean, we addressed that during the show. So, I mean, we talked about all those guys. Let's see here. Brian Buchanan, who's your top 2023 quarterback? It is Dante Moore. It's been Dante Moore. Brian, I don't recognize your name, so I don't know if you're new to the channel. If you are, we did a podcast. I think it was at the end of May. I don't think it was in June. It was sometime in May. Where actually broke down all the early quarterback board. There was like 12 guys on it of who Notre Dame is looking at. And I talked a lot about them. So we watched film and went through all that. So if you haven't seen that yet, look that up. It's on our YouTube page, obviously. And then I broke down some of those guys individually. So I actually have a Dante Moore eval. I have an Arch Manning eval. I have a Ricky Collins eval, which, by the way, I did talk to Ricky the other day. He did not make it to campus this summer. Notre Dame has not been in contact with him for a while. So I don't see him being part of that conversation moving forward. But yeah, for me, it's Dante Moore. It's clearly Dante Moore. Yeah, I can promise this will never happen. But this is a great comment. The obvious response to 247 is a Driscoll ball. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. But that's really funny. Brent Byer says, I'm not sure if you've ever done this or not, and my apologies if you have, but it would be great if you could do a show breaking down what all the positions are, like the Viper, Rover, etc. So we did something on Rover recently, but we've talked about the football 101s. We're going to do some things like that, kind of take the predictions and the positions and break them down and go that round. Let's see here. Jojo Pineda says, Kojo, you like Bellamy over Pope? I do not. As far as, now again, 2 different positions. Jaden Bellamy is a corner swing guy. Jake Pope is a safety. Jake Pope is a 4-star player for me. Jake Pope is a top 200 caliber recruit for me. I think Jake Pope is very underrated. Jalen Bellamy is a 3.5-star kind of guy for me. Michael says, Coach Donnelly was one hell of a coach, and he absolutely was. And he was an even better guy. He was a great guy to work for. There's no question about it. Nolan says, the way you talk about Bradshaw reminds me of the way you talked about Xavier Watts years ago when he was a 3-star that you felt a lot of people are sleeping on. Any comparison between the two? Yeah, there's a lot of comparison between the two. I think that Xavier Watts is a little bit stronger, a little bit even more explosive with the ball in his hands. Just that burst. I think Xavier has more speed, and Xavier is a better return guy. So that's kind of where I put it. Liam Gaming reminds us to hit the like button. Please hit the like button before you go. Jonathan says, definitely reading way too much into this, but Singleton, Lucas, and Pope were in a picture together at Alabama. They're all squatting down together in the front, away from the other guys in the back. This is what I love about following recruiting. That's awesome. All right. Sean, I explained this about Nwankpa earlier. I don't think he's 100% Ohio State. I think if he was, he'd already be committed. I think he's still deciding between the programs. I'm not saying he's going to pick Notre Dame. I'm not saying he's going to pick Ohio State. I think it's still a battle with that one as well. All right, Brandon says, say something happens during the fall where Notre Dame is put in a position where they now want to take 5 receivers. Do you think Notre Dame could get a commitment from Turner Bradshaw, or you think that ship sails? I mean, if it's like in the fall, like middle, late fall, I would imagine he's going to have a school by then. But if he's still uncommitted, go for it. But honestly, I still wouldn't do it. If they get into a situation where they have to take 5 receivers in one class, that would be a mistake because 4 is a lot. I think for me, it boils down to you're not going to have 5 players from a class stay for 4 years. So at some point in time, somebody's going to leave. I mean, we saw 5 receivers from the 2018 class, and they were fortunate to kind of have all them stay as long as they did. And honestly, I believe the reason they all stayed as long as they did is because of injuries and getting in trouble. Because you didn't have Kevin Austin for basically 2 full seasons. You didn't have Braden Lindsey for a full season, really 2 full seasons. And so those guys weren't in a position where they could be frustrated with leaving. And so they didn't, but Micah Jones left. But I just think it's too many guys in one class. And I would rather see them get a grad transfer for depth. It doesn't have to be a starter, but just somebody that's solid. I would rather see that. I don't like the idea of taking 5 receivers in a class. The one exception would be is if you think one of those guys could move somewhere else. That would be the exception. All right. BRBRKRK1. Somewhat concerned about DN play. The excitement is around potential, not production to date. Not counting production at D tackle with MT. But I don't think you can dismiss that, especially the way that the big end is going to be using this defense. I don't think you can dismiss that. I also would remind you that the returning production for the 2021 D line from what it was last year is better than the returning production was last year for last year's defensive line based on what they did in 2019. They returned more tackles for loss and they returned more sacks. And last year, you had Adetokunbo Ogundeji had led the defense with 4.5 sacks of returners. It's exactly how many Isaiah Foskey had. So I would disagree with the notion that we're not talking about production. Kurt Heinisch is a 3-year starter who had 7.5 tackles for loss last year. Myron Tagovailoa is basically a 3-year starter. And so you could say, hey, maybe we don't know he's going to do defensive end, but we know he can play. Jason Adamiola has been a key rotation player for 2 years. Isaiah Foskey was a key rotation player on a playoff team who had 4.5 sacks last year, which was second on the defense, I believe. So I don't think we're just talking about guys who've never done anything. We got to see that they can take it to the next level, but they've certainly played a lot. And I'm not concerned about defensive end play. I think the question is, how good are they going to be? That's the question. If we're talking about, hey, are they really going to be an elite group? That remains to be seen. They're at least going to be good because everyone that's being asked to play on the defensive line this year, with the exception of Jordan Patelho, was a key part of last year's rotation. I mean, if you think about it, Notre Dame only lost 2 guys from their defensive line last year. That's it. They lost Hayes and they lost Ogundeji. The guys that are replacing them played a bunch last year. Justin Adamiola played a bunch last year. He was the number 2 big end last year. Played a bunch. Isaiah Foskey played a bunch last year. Jordan Patelho is the only one who didn't play a bunch. Riley Mills played a bunch last year. And they're going to get Jacob Lacey back healthy. That's huge. Howard Cross played a decent amount last year. Kurt Heinisch played a ton last year. So they didn't really lose that many. They lost a whole lot more from the defense from the previous year when they lost like Wara and they lost Khalid Kareem and they lost Jameer Jones than what they lost from this past year's defense. Ronald T'Challa says, what makes recruits blow up? They don't have agents, and there are many times I see video on players that are considered superstars, and I don't get it. I think it's publicity. It's about where they're from. They come from areas that are you're going to have a lot of people talking about them. Some kids are savvy when it comes to social media, but a lot of it's just about who talks about them. I mean, there's not a lot of 3-star kids blown up, right? It's about, being promoted by the different services, Rivals, 247, ESPN, and all those kind of people. So when I look at it, that's kind of where I'm at with that. So, all righty. I hope that answers your question. Let's get back to a few more questions. Black Rush says, Dante Moore is the goods program changer. I agree. Alex Almeri, I can't believe this. I listened to you way back with Mr. Frank, that back on the old Irish Eyes and Irish Sports Daily days, and I was elated to see you doing your own thing here. Thank you, Alex. Welcome to the show. As Tommy Leonard says, welcome to IB Nation to all the newcomers. Edward asks, thoughts on Bruner, Wisconsin heavy, but can Notre Dame pull the upset? I do not believe that they can. All righty. Alex says, this is the best thing that has ever happened to me. Don't tell my wife and kids. Your secret is safe with us. As we need to adopt this policy. What is said in the IB chats and in the IB shows stays in the IB chats and IB shows. So let's do that. All right. Corey D, any new developments with Bradshaw Notre Dame? Nope, none. Patrick, I'm not putting your quote up. I'm going to get demonetized. Let's see here. Michael Collins, Athletic Sampson said BK bought a second house that he can use for recruiting since it's less than a mile from campus. You're able to expand. I don't read Pete Sampson's articles, so I have no idea what you're talking about. So that's not something Brian Kelly or anyone to share with anybody else. That's something he just shared in a one-on-one with Pete Sampson. And as I said, I don't read his stuff, so I can't expand on that, Michael. I apologize. Jesse Ferguson says, would you be satisfied if Notre Dame added Singleton, Merriweather, Williams, and Wagner on offense and Lucas, Snead, Morrison, Moore, and Bellamy on D and nothing else? I wouldn't be satisfied. I'd be thrilled. I mean, I'd look at it and say, man, I wish they would have got a true safety. That would be problematic, but I think Bellamy can play safety. I think they got 2 last year. I think that Moore could play safety. I'd be a little concerned about not having a safety in the class. But if you got those guys at receiver, you could maybe move a Mauryan Walker to Mauryan Walker to safety. So you might be able to do it then. But I mean, you'd have that'd be a great offensive skill class. I'd be a little bit concerned about the offensive line because it's low floor, high ceiling, but still a good offensive line class. Concerned from a Notre Dame standard standpoint. There'd still be a lot of teams in the country that would take Tanona, Chan, Craig, and Wagner as your offensive line class. You get Snead and Lucas, you have the best front 7 haul in the country, the best. And you get those guys at corner, then yeah, I feel really good about that. Yeah, I wouldn't be satisfied, Jesse. I'd be very excited. Nolan says, I know this is a change of subject, but is there anything in the works for an Irish Breakdown in-game chat this season? This is a group chat that would make a great in-game chat. Yes, there will be that. We had one last year. It'll be on the website, though, or at least it'll be on the message board, which we had the publisher meeting today. I've got to let it marinate. I got to sit down with my wife, who was also listening to the call, and she's kind of go over and explain all the technical stuff to me. But we're feeling like there could be something we're going to do, but it'll be things like that. We had a chat during the season, and it's just like it was during the season. I would kind of start a web page, and we had a comment section below that we would chat in. We're hoping this year we actually have a message board. I'm hoping to have that up here soon. We'll see. Like I said, I got to sit down, talk to my wife, and go from there. But to me, you look at it, and I feel like we'll have a really good solution this year, but it'll be on the website. That's where it'll be. And most likely it'll be a premium thing. So, but we'll see. Like I said, a lot of that's still a work in progress, but we will definitely have an in-game chat this year. It won't be anything on YouTube. Like I won't be doing like a game show. We'll be at the games and we'll be doing our work and all that, but we will have a post-game show, but we'll have something on the website. It's a good question for Brian. Would you rather see Notre Dame join the ACC or Big Ten? If Notre Dame is forced to join due to new playoff format, would Notre Dame be more fun for fans? I personally do not want to see Notre Dame join a conference, and I would rather see Notre Dame join the SEC, the Pac-12, the American Athletic Conference, the Big 12, the MAC, the Sun Belt, Mountain West. Am I leaving anybody out? Did I name every other conference but the Big Ten yet? I think I did. And I have a gentleman named Andrew that has been doing a lot of research on an article going back to why Notre Dame never joined the Big Ten. And it traces a lot of the things that happened on the Big Ten side of things that kept Notre Dame out. Now they want Notre Dame in, and I would give them the middle finger, to be honest with you. I would never, ever join the Big Ten. Would I like to see him join the ACC? That would be my choice if I had one choice of a current conference. If Notre Dame was going to join a conference, I don't want them to join a conference. ACC would be my pick. But the other thing, Brian, and Sean Davis and I talked about this, and we may do a show on this here this summer, is I would actually like to see Notre Dame start their own conference and really shake up college football. And I think we're going to do a full show on that. That'd be a lot of fun. Like a Notre Dame, a new power conference that Notre Dame could create. I think it'd be a lot of fun. A lot of fun. Brian says, if we had to join a conference, would you rather see ACC or Big Ten? I think Notre Dame in the Big Ten West would be a great fit. I do not want Notre Dame anywhere near the Big Ten. And I think it'd only be a great fit geographically. I mean, they're all public schools, right? Almost all of them are public schools. None of them can compete with Notre Dame from an academic standpoint. There's no value to Notre Dame in playing Wisconsin and Purdue and Iowa and Illinois and those teams every year. It does nothing for you. I would much rather see them go to the ACC. Let's see here. Liam Gaming says, is there going to be a show tonight? Yes, there will be a second show tonight. I promised everybody last night we will have a second show since last night's show got screwed up outside of my control, but we will have a second show tonight. And I'll let you know what the topic is going to be later on this evening. Okay. All right. And then Nolan says, that's great news about the in-game chat. I would love to see your analysis in-game on the spot. And so what the analysis is, number one, it's a lot of other people talking, but what I'll do and what Vince and I will do is during the game, I'll talk about specific plays like, hey, here's what happened on that play. The quarterback, saw the safety coming down, so he held on to the ball, threw it over top, and, read through his progression, hit the backside end cut, and here's what happened on that made it good, or here's why it didn't work, or, hey, so-and-so hit the wrong gap, which opened up the run lane. That's, why Kyron Williams did this. It's kind of analysis. And then, of course, fans just chatting and sharing their opinions. But we try to make it like analysis, explaining what happened on certain plays. Hey, Notre Dame's, really struggling on such and such. Here's why, that kind of thing. And so that's what we talked about. Jack Malooly says, you've talked at length about wanting Bradshaw, shifty, explosive slot guy. Is there a running back recruit that could switch to slot a la Theo Riddick type? Not on Notre Dame's board, no. There isn't a guy that could do that, in my opinion. That doesn't mean there aren't running backs out there that could do that. Certainly there are. But right now in the 2022 class, there's nobody that fits that, and there's nobody on the roster that fits that other than Kyron Williams. But I feel like Kyron Williams is going to be gone. Again, this is just my opinion, is going to be gone by the time that this class shows up on campus. Liam Gaming, what's the biggest difference between Craig and Bruner or Hinsman? I think Craig and Hinsman are very similar. I think Craig is a longer. I think Hinsman's a little stronger, just a little bit more powerful, a little bit more explosive, in my opinion, off the ball. I honestly like Craig better than Bruner. I've said this before. I'm not a big Joe Bruner fan. I think Joe Bruner is exactly what is wrong with why people miss a lot when it comes to recruiting offensive linemen. He is a very highly ranked guy, but he's highly ranked because he's 6'6", 300 pounds and already kind of bigger than everybody else. I don't think he projects the way that others do. If I had to pick between Ashton Craig and Joe Bruner, I would probably take Ashton Craig, to be completely honest with you. Justin Nagel, I appreciate the super chat. Justin, I've seen your other questions. I'm going to follow up with you on Twitter. So I will follow up with you on that. So I'm not going to respond to your other comments in the chat. So, all right, let's see if we have any more questions here. Omar Austin says, could the wide receiver departures be a good thing in the long run? Seems like it will force Notre Dame to develop younger receivers in 2020, 2023. I mean, I hope so. I hope it pans out that way, Omar. I'm going to believe it when we see it, kind of thing. Yeah. All righty. Tommy Leonard says, Brian, did Lou do a story about that? I assume you're talking about the Big Ten thing. I would imagine he did at some point in time. I mean, with all the amazing historical things that Lou talked about, I would imagine he talked about that at some point in time. I don't know for a fact that he did. He and I have talked a lot about it. And so I had Andrew kind of go do some research, and he did a ton of research. I'm going to read through it tonight, either put it up tomorrow or Thursday. But it's going to be good. And some people understand more why I don't ever want anything with the Big Ten. Absolutely. Ronald's kind of wraps up my feelings. Notre Dame cannot go with Big Ten. I would have to beat my head on the outside corner of my home till unconscious, wake up, and do it again. That's just hell on earth. I agree. Larry also agrees with your Big Ten hate. Absolutely. Thanks. Let's see. Let's see here. Patrick McGrain says, I'm with you on their own conference. Keep it independent, but still have a champ game. That could entice some big boys to go back to being independent. It wouldn't work that way because the problem is you'd have to make it a conference because then you'd have to have you can't sign a TV contract as an independent because there's no independent conference, right? You'd have to make an actual conference. And so that's the thing that we talked about and the thing that will, if Notre Dame really wants to shake up college football, that would be a way to do it. All righty. Okay, so that is Brian Buchanan says worst fan base, Brian. My opinion is Michigan. I think Michigan fans are the worst. So anyway, that's going to do it for today's show. Just a touch over 2 hours, so I appreciate everybody being a part of it. Before you leave, please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button as well. Hit the notification bell so that you know when we're going to do shows. That's going to be very important today. So please do that for me. If you're listening via podcast, please give us a 5-star review. And as always, check out irishbreakdown.com. And we're going to have a lot of things going on here over the next couple weeks. I'm very excited to figure some things out and get those announced to you as we continue really diving into our preseason previews. Now that the recruiting visits are behind us, I'm way behind on getting analysis done of the team. I'm going to ramp that up here in July as we get ready closer and closer to fall camp. So I'm very excited about that and look forward to doing those next shows. So thanks everybody for joining us. Get some rest, relax, and be on the lookout for an announcement about a show doing tonight. I will let you know here sometime this evening when we're going to do it and what the topic will be about. So everyone have an awesome rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon.